Hey guys, thank you for stopping by the channel tonight. Imagine this. You're holding a rough wooden bowl. Inside there's only a bit of cold, watery porridge, with a few barley grains floating as if mocking you. The sound of your stomach growls, echoing through the damp stone dungeon, while above the castle, the smell of roasting meat spreads through the air. It's a cruel contrast, where a meal isn't meant to satisfy, but merely to keep you breathing. Tonight's story will take you into the footsteps of medieval prisoners, facing endless hunger in the winter dungeon, where every crumb of bread, every spoon of porridge, becomes a battle for survival. If you enjoy this style of storytelling, don't forget to hit subscribe so the channel can keep growing and I can bring you even more chilling journeys. Now then, dim the lights around you, find a comfortable place to lie down, pull up a warm blanket, and let your body relax. Let me guide you deeper into the darkness, where the rare meal is no longer a comfort, but a cruel reminder that life hangs by a fragile thread. The old, cracked wooden bowl reeks of sourness. It is placed before you like a cheap favor from the cold hand of the jailer. The surface of the wood has soaked up water through many years, darkened like damp earth in the dungeon. Cracks run along its side, where drops of watery porridge have long dried into rough ridges, and when you bring it close to your nose, a sour stench stabs straight into your brain, making you shiver. That is not the smell of food, but the smell of waste, of death soaked into the wood, seeping through every grain, as if this bowl has witnessed hundreds before you slurp their last spoonfuls of life. You look inside and see a pale, murky liquid, cloudy like rice water left too long. A few barley grains float listlessly, swollen and bloated like dead fish eyes. You hear your stomach gurgle loudly, the sound so strong it makes the other prisoners turn their heads. Each look is hollow, craving, and also desperate, for everyone knows no one has more than the other, that the wooden bowl before each person is nothing more than a tool to stretch hunger for a few more hours. You gently lift the bowl, the damp cold sinking into your hand, the wood heavy from soaking in water. It is not an object to eat from, but like a stone pressed against your palm, reminding you that life here is not a right but a punishment. You bring it close to your lips, the only warmth rising from the thin porridge, but that warmth is fragile, lonely, swallowed instantly by the dungeon's chill. You blow lightly, then sip a small mouthful. The liquid slides across your tongue, with no taste except the sour wood and the mold of the bowl. It is thick like mud, but at the same time so thin it leaves nothing in your mouth. You swallow, and instead of being filled, your empty stomach only clenches harder, as if furious at being deceived. You take another spoonful, and another, but hunger still reigns, while the cold tightens ever more around your ribs. In the corner, an old prisoner sits hunched, his bowl nearly empty, yet his tongue still scrapes again and again along the rim, trying to lick off the streaks of porridge caught in the wood grain. The dry rasp of his tongue scrapes into your ears, carving despair deeper. Another man, younger, bends to the stone floor to pick up the crumbs that fell. His hands tremble, his eyes light up for an instant at finding a single fallen barley grain. He puts it in his mouth, chewing slowly as if savouring festival roast meat. You return to your bowl. There is little left. The last grains of barley sink in the thin liquid, and you sip until the very last drop. When you set the bowl down, the sour smell of the wood still clings to your nose, making you gag. But your empty belly starts to howl again, as if mocking your naive hope. Above, through the stone ceiling, you hear distant laughter. The smell of roasting meat, drifting through some unseen crack, mixes with the dungeon's mold. Your heart tightens. In the same castle, one world is a warm feast. Another is life dangling inside a sour wooden bowl. That opposition is not just class divide, but a cold declaration. You are no longer human. You are only something that exists to endure. You set the bowl down, your palm still marked with damp stains. A moment later, you feel your tongue lightly lick the rim of the bowl, not because you want to, but because your body forces you. The sour, the wood, the mold, all mixed together, but still less cruel than the emptiness gnawing inside. Beside you, a hoarse voice speaks. Be careful. Don't let the bowl break. If you lose the bowl, you'll have nothing to eat. You look down and see the cracks running deeper along the wooden wall. Indeed, just one hard knock, and it will split. And then, no one will grant you another. The old wooden bowl is not only a container of porridge, it is the last fragile raft adrift on a sea of hunger. You grip it tighter, the sour stench rising stronger, swirling around like a reminder. Your life, your fate, is now trapped inside a rotting piece of wood, and death waits in every cold breath of the dungeon. The fragile steam rises into the freezing air, a thin wisp like a soul leaving its body, trembling in the darkness before vanishing after only a few seconds. You lower your eyes to the bowl of porridge before you, that tiny bit of heat, like a false promise, a flickering flame in the icy dungeon. But in truth, it's not enough to warm your trembling hands, much less to fight off the cold, seeping up from the damp stone floor, through your skin and into your very bones. Every breath you exhale instantly turns to white mist, mixing with the smell of mold and rusty iron around the cell, turning the air into something thick and stifling. You lift the bowl, your tongue brushing the thin porridge steaming up, hoping it will leave a bit of warmth. But as it slides down your throat, the heat lasts only an instant before it's gone, leaving an emptiness even colder than before, as if your empty stomach is mocking you that it was never fooled. The other prisoners around you are also slurping, the steam rising from dozens of wooden bowls joining into a thin mist, but instead of evoking warmth, it only makes the dungeon more stifling, damp and heavy. You see the bloodshot eyes of the man across from you, his gaze not at you but fixed on the steam rising from the bowl in your hands. In that gaze there is hunger, envy, and a hint of madness, as if he wants to reach out, snatch your bowl and drink every drop of fragile warmth left. You know he won't, because chains bind his hands and feet to the wall, but that look makes you understand one thing. In this place, even steam has its value, and could become the reason for a bloody struggle if someone is desperate enough. You gently blow into the bowl, watch the mist curl, and remember a distant winter day outside, where you once held a bowl of hot soup by your family's fireplace. Back then, steam was a symbol of happiness, of fullness. Now, it's only a sign that the food is too little, too thin, and will vanish quickly like the last scraps of hope inside you. You hear your stomach growl, and the stomachs of the other prisoners too, a poor man's symphony echoing through the narrow space, reminding you that all are living on the faint breath of a few thin barley grains. The steam fades so quickly you feel regret like losing one last breath of humanity. You bow your head and take a large gulp, ignoring the burning pain as the hot liquid slides down your throat, because you're afraid if you're slower, the cold will steal even that tiny warmth. Beside you, an old prisoner trembling sets his bowl on the floor, both hands gripping it tight to hold the heat for his frozen palms. He doesn't drink right away, but presses his lips to the rim, inhaling the steam like an addict chasing one last illusion. You understand him, because sometimes just inhaling warmth is enough for a mind to paint an imagined feast, with roast meat, soft bread, and sweet wine. But that illusion fades faster than steam, leaving a bitterness deeper than hunger. In the corner, a young prisoner licks the edge of his bowl, eyes shut tight, tears rolling down, maybe from hunger, maybe from the bitterness of realizing that what he's inhaling is not the smell of rich soup, but the sour rot of old wood, mixed with steam steeped in dungeon stench. You shudder, realizing the cruelty of hunger. It doesn't kill you at once. It paints warm illusions before your eyes, then wipes them away in a heartbeat, dropping your soul into a pit of despair. A drop of porridge falls from the spoon, sending up its last wisp of steam before hitting the cold stone floor, where it instantly congeals into a thin smear. You watch it like watching yourself. Your last breath will also be sucked dry by the dungeon's stone, leaving only a meaningless husk. The wind whistles through cracks in the wall, the cold draft sweeping away the steam, sweeping away the last scraps of warmth. You raise the bowl high, trying to take a few more spoonfuls, but realize the heat is gone, only cold, foul liquid left, and the sour taste soaking into your tongue. You close your eyes, feel the cold creep from your stomach to your chest, then to your throat, like an ice snake tightening around each breath. In that moment you understand that here, food is not meant to fill you, but to remind you that life still exists, fragile as the steam fading in the dark. And as you look around, at the gaunt faces, the burning red eyes in the shadows, you know that all of them, like you, are living not because of hope to escape, but only to wait for another bowl of porridge, to wait for another wisp of steam, then watch it vanish again into the endless cold. The porridge is so thin you can see the bottom of the bowl, a pale liquid glimmering under the flickering torchlight as if mocking the one trembling and holding it in their hands. You tilt the bowl, and the thin, sticky layer clinging to the wooden side slides down quickly, revealing the scratched bottom, stained with cracks steeped in sourness from years of never being cleaned. Hunger squeezes your stomach so tightly you no longer have time to think, but as your eyes follow the bare bottom of the bowl, you suddenly understand. Life here is so fragile, it can be measured in a few spoonfuls of cloudy rice water. No grain is enough to fill the stomach, only a few tiny ones, drifting like dead bodies, just enough to remind you this meal is fate's cruel joke. You gulp down a mouthful, and the cold liquid slides down your throat, leaving no taste, no strength, only making your stomach ache and contract harder. You glance to the side. An old prisoner is tilting his bowl to the very last drop, then using his trembling finger to scrape along the bowl's sides to collect the remaining grain powder. He puts his finger in his mouth, closes his eyes, his gaunt face showing a fleeting moment of satisfaction, but then it collapses again, like someone waking from a dream. Hunger doesn't disappear, it only hides and then comes back fiercer. In the corner, another man throws his bowl to the stone floor in anger, the thin porridge splashing out like dirty water, and he screams curses without strength, the sound echoing in the cell like a wounded beast's cry. But as soon as the drops of porridge hit the ground, rats appear, small and quick, rushing in to fight over them, and the prisoner's eyes follow them in despair, regretful for wasting even that fragile bit. You keep sipping, trying to imagine the sour taste of the wood, the faint smoke smell as the scent of real soup. But your mind no longer has the strength to trick itself. Instead, each gulp makes you remember more clearly the smell of roasted meat drifting down from above, where the lavish feast of the nobles is happening. Up there, laughter spreads, knives and forks clink, while down here, the sounds of growling stomachs, dry swallowing, and wooden spoons scraping the bottom of bowls echo like a tragic melody. You raise your bowl higher, tilting it to the very end, to drink the last drop, and in that moment, the torchlight, reflecting off the empty bottom, shines like your own ribs, bare, hollow, with nothing left to cover them. A long breath escapes your mouth, the white mist dissolving into the darkness, merging with the thick silence, where each prisoner can only clutch their empty bowl, hoping tomorrow brings another portion of porridge, even if it's just as thin, even if it still shows the bottom. And then a chilling thought creeps in. One day, when the bottom of the bowl no longer appears through the thin porridge but appears in your empty hands, when even the rice water disappears, then your life will vanish with it, like a shadow fading into the endless cold of the dungeon. A few barley grains, swollen and half-cooked, float lazily on the surface of the water like tiny eyes quietly watching you. They rise and fall with each movement of the bowl, reflecting the dim firelight as if they have souls of their own, knowing you're looking, knowing you're hungry. You lift the spoon, stir gently, and hear a faint rattling sound, the noise of half-raw grains tapping against the wooden sides. A sour smell rises, sharp and stinging to the eyes. In that moment, you suddenly realize this meal is no longer something to eat, but a cruel test of how much a human can endure before collapsing. The barley is soft on the outside, but when your teeth touch it, the core is still hard. A strange bitterness spreads across your tongue, tasting of both soil and metal. You try to chew, try to believe you're swallowing something that could be called food, but your stomach twists, demanding more, demanding the impossible. In the dark corner, a prisoner uses his filthy fingernails to pick out each tiny grain from his bowl, placing them on his palm like treasured jewels. He counts them, then lifts each one to his mouth, chewing slowly, his eyes hazy like someone praying. Another, out of patience, licks around the rim of his bowl, trying to find something left behind, the sound of his tongue scraping the wood like a knife sharpening on stone. No one speaks a word. There are only breaths, the rustle of damp straw, and the smell of mildew mixed with the stench of hunger, the scent of people forgotten in cold stone. You remember the days of freedom, when barley was a small part of a warm loaf of bread, and you never imagined a day when it would become the ruler, forcing you to beg to swallow it. There's something both absurd and grotesque in that paradox. A tiny grain now holds the power of life and death over humans. You look around and catch the gaze of an old prisoner with grey hair. He's prying a barley grain stuck between his teeth with a splinter of bone. When it comes loose, he stares at it for a moment, then puts it back in his mouth, expressionless, as if the act has become instinct. Cold wind seeps through the cracks in the wall, the torch flickers, and its light falls on other bowls of porridge, all showing the same sight. A few lonely barley grains drifting in a sea of thin water, like the last living creatures in a dead world. The faint sound of teeth hitting spoons echoes, and for a moment you realize its rhythm. The sound of a herd of humans trying to eat the uneatable, trying to live when there's nothing left to hold on to. A hoarse cough breaks out, then goes silent. Maybe someone swallowed wrong, or maybe they just ran out of strength. No one turns to look. Here, compassion is a luxury rarer than food itself. You lower your eyes to your own bowl, seeing only a few grains clinging to the bottom. Each grain is a question. How many drops of sweat? How many waves of hunger did it take to get them here? You think of faraway fields where barley grows beneath warm sunlight, while you are swallowing it in darkness. The same grain, two fates. You inhale lightly, the faint smell of porridge rising, mingling with the damp odour of stone. The steam is gone, leaving behind a scent caught between life and decay. You swallow another grain, this time without chewing, letting it slide down easier because your teeth are numb and your gums swollen from the cold. The barley sticks in your throat. You gag, try to swallow, then cough weakly. Each breath burns your throat, and through the cough, you smell rusty iron from the chains, blending with the porridge into a taste like metal dissolving in blood. You lower your head, your trembling hands clutching the bowl, afraid to drop it, afraid to lose the only thing that reminds you you're still alive. The dripping from the ceiling echoes again, steady, like a clock marking time between meals. Outside, the wind howls. Inside, silence. And the barley grains still drift, still swollen as if breathing, as if knowing they'll appear again in tomorrow's bowl just like today. No more, no better, only older, and a little colder. The prisoner holds the bowl with trembling hands, both hungry and disgusted, his thin fingers clinging to the damp object as if afraid it might vanish. Yet his eyes stare at it with a kind of hopeless contempt. He knows well that inside there's nothing but cold porridge water, a few swollen barley grains like lumps of uncooked dough, and a sour stench seeping through every crack in the wood. Even so, he doesn't let go, because this bowl is the only fragile boundary between life and death. He takes a deep breath, the cold air stabbing his chest, then slowly raises the bowl to his lips. His hands shake so badly the liquid inside ripples, spilling over the edge, dripping onto the filthy stone floor, mixing with moss and leaking water into a grimy grey streak. The sound is small but echoes clearly in the silent dungeon, freezing him in place. Another prisoner in the dark corner instantly lifts his head, eyes glinting like a beast catching the scent of blood. Just a single drop of porridge spilled, and everyone hears it, already thinking of fighting for it. He quickly bends down, shielding the bowl with his arms, his back hunched like an animal guarding its last scrap of food. Hunger makes him fear even his own kind. He touches the bowl to his lips, the taste of mouldy wood and cold porridge spreading, tightening his throat. The slimy sourness clings to his tongue, like swallowing mud mixed with ash, but he swallows anyway. Each gulp carries humiliation with it, as if forcing himself to consume his own degradation. The porridge doesn't ease the hunger. It only reminds him more clearly of the emptiness inside. He slurps faster, the sound loud enough to scare even himself, but he can't stop. He must drink it all, use every drop, because no one is sure if there will be another meal tomorrow. An old prisoner across the room, wrinkled and frail, watches him with eyes that waver between pity and craving. The old man trembles too, but from the cold, too weak to drink. He holds his bowl in his lap, rubbing its wooden sides as if trying to find the warmth that's long gone. Seeing this, he turns away, but guilt creeps into his chest. Then he asks himself, why feel guilty? Here, everyone only has enough strength to live for themselves. Morality means nothing when hunger has bitten into the heart. He licks the rim of the bowl, his tongue touching the dried traces of porridge, trying to scrape out the last bit of flavour, but there's only the taste of rust and damp wood. His shoulders curl inward, the cold rising from the floor, touching his spine. He sets the bowl down, looks at his hands, filthy fingers, long nails, trembling beyond control. The skin is cracked, red, and in every crevice the spilled porridge has dried into a faint white film. He exhales, his hands still frozen in the shape of holding a bowl, as if not yet realizing it's empty. Hunger stretches time, every second an agony. Somewhere, the dripping sound returns. Water seeping from the ceiling, falling onto the damp stone floor, each drop marking the rhythm of decay. The sound makes him think of the porridge he just drank. Imagine catching those drops. Would it make a difference? He chuckles quietly, a soundless laugh of breath and chattering teeth. Outside, the wind howls through the narrow cracks, dragging in a wave of cold that makes the nearby torch flicker. His shadow, twisted and broken, dances on the wall like the shadow of a creature no longer human. He lifts his head, eyes sunken, the flickering light in them like dying embers. A young prisoner beside him whispers, "You still have porridge?" He turns, that voice tightening his chest. The question carries no threat, only raw envy. He shakes his head, hiding the empty bowl behind his back, afraid the other might snatch it. But the young man just smiles, a dry, withered smile, then lowers his head and says nothing more. The breathing of the prisoners around them grows heavy, as if the entire dungeon itself is sighing. The air reeks of bodies, dampness, and smoke. He looks down at his bowl, then suddenly runs his tongue along the rim like a madman. The rough, dry tongue scrapes over cracked wood, tasting the salt of sweat and the rot of old timber. There's nothing left, but he keeps going, because sometimes the act isn't about food anymore. It's to prove he still has will, even if it's just a desperate reflex of survival. His fingers tighten around the bowl, knuckles turning white. From the hallway, footsteps echo, the heavy, steady rhythm of a guard. He stops, holding his breath. The jingle of keys follows, then silence. No one dares move, no one dares cough. Only his teeth chatter, from cold and fear alike. The bowl in his hands feels heavier, as if carrying his guilt. In the darkness, he realizes he's trembling not just from hunger, but from the growing thing inside him that is no longer hope, but a slow, simmering hatred, like a small flame in the damp dungeon, waiting for a gust of wind to ignite. Swallowed into your mouth like thin mud, it has no taste at all. Just a slippery, cold liquid, heavy as it slides down your throat like water from a deep, contaminated well. You feel as though you're drinking something not meant to be swallowed, but meant to punish, as if each mouthful of porridge is a reminder that you are no longer human. It has no scent, no flavor, but it carries a vicious power that makes your stomach convulse again and again, stirring up a hunger even fiercer than before. You try to swallow slowly, hoping to stretch out the moment of being filled, but each time the liquid touches your tongue, the taste of moldy wood, metal, and damp cold mixes together, spreading across your mouth, leaving a bitter aftertaste like swallowing ashes. For a fleeting moment, you feel as if you're eating your own shadow, something invisible, meaningless, yet still forced to cling to it, because there's nothing else left to believe in. Your breath condenses into a faint white mist, blending with the stench of the stone dungeon, fading and vanishing. In the corner, another prisoner is swallowing too, small sips, eyes shut tight, his face twisted as if enduring pain. Each sound of swallowing echoes in the silence, soft but far-reaching, as if the whole dungeon is moving to the rhythm of some strange ritual, a ritual of starved souls. You hear clearly his throat making dry, trembling sounds, like chains clinking against the wall. The feeling makes you nauseous, not because you're disgusted with him, but because you see yourself in him, reflecting an image you want to forget. When you look up, the weak torchlight casts your shadow on the wall, warped, long, thin, like bone. That shadow trembles, as if laughing, mocking you for having become this low. You push it away, focus on swallowing the rest, but the dryness rises up from your throat. You sniff, cough dryly, a few drops of porridge spraying out, landing cold on your thigh. You quickly bend down, wipe it with your finger, lick it fast as if afraid it will be stolen. The act makes you feel ashamed, but you can't stop. Hunger has punctured every boundary, devoured pride, leaving only raw instinct. Your cough makes a few others look up. One glance flickers across, sharp, probing, then dies away. No one speaks, because speaking means wasting breath. Only the dripping of water from the ceiling remains, steady like a clock counting dead time. You ask yourself how long you've been imprisoned. 1 season? 2? Or so many years you no longer remember the taste of real food? You don't know anymore, only that everything in your mouth now tastes the same, the taste of damp wood, mold and dust. Suddenly a sound breaks out, the spoon striking hard against the bowl. A young prisoner, so thin his cheeks hollow inward, is scraping for the last barley grains, the screech of wood echoing like a knife cut. He tilts his bowl, licking every streak of porridge stuck to it, then lifts his head, eyes glistening. That look isn't directed at anyone, but it chokes you, as if he's asking, "How many times do we have to do this?" You don't answer, because you don't know either. Maybe until there's nothing left to swallow, until the throat stiffens, until cold and hunger blend into one, no longer knowing what's life and what's waiting for death. You lift your bowl, finish it off, your tongue burning numb. A barley grain sticks between your teeth. You try to pry it out with your tongue, but it's hard, cold, and seems to mock you for being too weak to even chew. You bite hard, hearing a faint crack, unsure if it's the grain breaking or your tooth. A metallic taste spreads out, and you fall silent, afraid to swallow again. The remaining porridge cools, the water settling in the bowl, revealing its scratched bottom. You look down, seeing your own reflection blurred through the surface. A strange face, cheekbones sharp, eyes deep as stone hollows. You no longer recognize the person in that mirror. Cold seeps up from the floor, making you shiver, and the bowl in your hands suddenly feels heavier, as if holding the darkness of the dungeon itself. You narrow your eyes, watching the last wisp of steam escape from the bowl, a tiny fragment of life left. It drifts into the air, blends into the darkness, and you know, even that tastelessness will vanish like everything else here, where even the sound of swallowing echoes like the wind breathing through corpses. The sound of your stomach growling echoes in the silence, like the cry of a beast trapped in an iron cage, desperate and bare. The sound is small, but in the confined space of the dungeon, it carries so far it seems to rebound off the cold stone walls. Each gurgle from your belly is not just a signal of hunger, but an unending reminder of emptiness, of what you've lost, and of death creeping closer with every breath. You try to hold your breath, to hide the sound, but your body betrays you, your stomach contracting, the gas inside bubbling like a puddle over cooling embers. A few other prisoners turn their heads slightly, their eyes glowing in the dark, not out of pity, but out of empathy. They too are enduring the same hunger, the same humiliation of having their own bodies howl like animals. Someone in the corner lets out a low chuckle, a hoarse, twisted sound, then stops when he realizes no one joins in. You look toward him, see his shoulders trembling from cold or hunger. You can't tell. That laugh seems like his way of escaping the sound of his own stomach, but it's useless. Every sound here is the same: dripping water, chains lightly clinking, and stomach growls blending into a monotonous symphony of starved souls. Your stomach keeps rumbling, steady, aching. You press your hand to it, trying to push it down, but each time you do, it boils up harder, as if it knows you're resisting it. Cold sweat beads at your nape, sliding down your spine. A vague shame spreads. No one says anything, but you feel as if they can hear every growl, every cramp, as if the whole cell is listening to you suffer. An old prisoner next to you leans in, his voice gravelly like stones. Good. At least your stomach still growls. When it's silent, it means you're about to die. His words make you shudder. You look at him, his eyes sunken, rimmed with dark circles, but strangely calm. Perhaps he's heard his own stomach fall silent long ago, and now lives only on the memory of that sound. You bow your head slightly, unsure whether to be thankful or afraid. The wind whistles through a crack above, bringing in a blast of cold air that slaps your face. The torch near the cell door flickers, its yellow light swaying, stretching the warped shadows on the walls like bodies being pulled endlessly. In that light, the bellies of other prisoners also rise and fall, their chests so thin each breath sounds like wind blowing through bones. You hear another sound, the gulp of someone swallowing saliva. Someone, maybe even you, trying to trick the body into thinking something's about to go down the throat. But the throat is dry, there's no saliva left. Hunger strips everything from you: water, warmth, will. Only sound remains, the only thing still alive, the only thing proving that something inside you still moves, even if it's only instinct. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, longer, like a silent roar. The other prisoners don't look anymore. They're used to it. They've heard that sound thousands of times from themselves, until it became the background of existence. Some even rely on it to know they're still alive. When the stomach growls, it means you're not dead yet. When nothing is heard, only silence remains. Silence in the dungeon is the sign of the end. You close your eyes, trying to imagine that sound as water boiling in a pot of soup, as meat sizzling over a fire. You imagine the smell of smoke, of burnt bread, of strong wine, but the fantasy is quickly crushed by reality. The smell of mold, of dampness, of rat corpses wrapping around you. Your stomach growls not because it's waiting for a meal, but because it's digesting the last of you. It clenches as if trying to eat your own organs, your own self. You open your eyes, your breath broken, your chest aching. A wave of dizziness hits, everything spinning. You brace yourself on the floor, the freezing stone cutting through your skin, and for a moment, you think you hear something else mixed with the growl, the whispers of the stone, of the souls who once sat here, also hungry, also listening to this same sound before disappearing. You tilt your head, listening, but there's only silence, a silence so thick you can hear your own heartbeat. Then, another gurgle, small but enough to tear the quiet apart. You let out a faint laugh, not knowing if it's from sadness or acceptance. Perhaps this stomach growl is your last companion, the only thing that won't abandon you in the dark. And when you place your hand on your belly, feeling its slight tremor, you no longer know if it's a sign of life, or just the final reflex of a body exhausted, trying to remind you it still exists, still lingers, in a world where even silence knows how to swallow people whole. You realize, this is not a meal, just a way not to die immediately, a cold awareness slithering through your mind like icy water. Before you is not food, not something to fill you, but only a grey, murky liquid keeping the last tremors in your body alive. Each mouthful goes down not to bring strength, but to prolong the agony, to stretch out the state between life and death. You look into the wooden bowl, see each barley grain swollen, hollow, drifting like dead insects in a puddle. Your hand still lifts the bowl, but there is no hope in the movement, only instinct, like a slave's hand moving out of forced habit. A feeling of shame, of ache, rises in your chest, pressing on your breath. In your mind appears the image of ancient banquets, light, laughter, the smell of roasting meat, soft bread melting in your mouth, all like a stolen luxury dream, leaving in your hands this cold liquid. In the corner of the dungeon, a young prisoner bends over, clutching his stomach, his eyes wide open, staring at the porridge as if staring into an abyss. He trembles, slurping hurriedly, the barley grains not yet burst sliding over his tongue like pebbles. Each swallow echoes dryly, tearing through the silence. Beside him, an old prisoner sits motionless, his bowl untouched but his hands already stiff, his lips barely moving as if murmuring a prayer. You don't even know if you're eating or performing some kind of ritual, a ritual of those not yet dead but no longer alive. Above, through a crack in the stone ceiling, a thin thread of light slips in, trembling, then vanishes, leaving thick darkness behind. You suddenly realize you're counting each barley grain in your bowl like counting heartbeats. Each grain is a moment of existence, a breath stretched a little longer. You're not eating. You're signing a temporary contract with hunger to gain a few more hours. The air in the cell is thick, each prisoner a gaunt shadow with a trembling wooden bowl in hand. The sound of teeth tapping the bowl, tongues scraping for dried porridge streaks, all blending into a ghastly music only those in the dungeon can understand. You inhale deeply, but smell only damp mold and the sourness of wood, a smell that's clung to your mind, erasing the memory of real food. A drop of porridge falls from the rim of your bowl onto your hand, cold as ice, sliding over your cracked fingers, then dropping to the stone floor where green moss grows thick. You watch that drop, see a rat emerge from a crack, dart out, lick it like treasure, then vanish into the dark. The sight pierces you like a knife. The rat at least seems satisfied with what you're trying to call food. Your stomach growls again, your belly like an empty well echoing. You lift the spoon, scoop the rest, swallow, feeling as if swallowing a curse. The taste of mouldy wood spreads out, your throat dry and burning, your eyes stinging. You wonder if they deliberately make the porridge this thin, not to save rations but to remind you your right to survive is now in their hands. You glance across, see another prisoner tilting his bowl for the last drop, his tongue sweeping around the wooden rim like a cat licking milk. A smear of porridge clings to his lips. He wipes it with a trembling finger, then puts it in his mouth, closing his eyes as if savouring. There is no joy, only despair disguised as habit. Everyone in the dungeon already understands what you do. This is not a meal, only a thread tied around your neck, pulling you back from the edge a little longer. The longer the thread pulls, the tighter it squeezes, the more it hurts. You sip the last of it, the bottom of the bowl revealed, scratched and filthy. You look into that bottom, see your own distorted reflection, deep-set eyes, sharp cheekbones, cracked, dry lips. A trembling breath escapes you, turning into a thin white mist rising and dissolving into the cold, as if your very soul were drifting out with that breath, scattering into pieces, merging with the darkness and damp smell of the dungeon. Your stomach churns constantly, the hunger stronger than the cold. It's no longer just a feeling, but a raging wave rising from deep inside, tearing apart every remaining thought. You clutch your belly, feeling as if a wild animal inside is clawing, screaming to be fed. The bubbling gurgles echo, blending with the dripping water from the dungeon ceiling, sounding like the grotesque music of decaying life. The cold seeps into every joint, but it's still no match for the emptiness in your stomach. That bottomless black hole sucking every bit of strength, every ounce of will out of your body. Each breath you draw is cold and heavy, like swallowing iron shavings and ash. You place your hand on your belly, feel the dry skin stretched tight over your ribs, every tendon standing out like strings about to snap. In the corner of the room, another prisoner groans in his sleep, his mouth moving as if eating something invisible. Maybe he's dreaming of bread, or a piece of meat, but you know when he wakes, he'll only see his empty hands and a cold wooden bowl. Hunger lets no one sleep. Even when you try to close your eyes, it gnaws at you, jerking you awake with a dry throat and a spinning head. The breathing of the others is no longer steady, but broken, weak, like wind slipping through the narrow cracks of the stone wall. The smell of sweat, mildew, and unwashed bodies mixes together, thick and heavy. But strangely in hunger, you almost stop feeling disgust. That stench makes you think of something like the smell of meat, a cruel trick of a brain starving to death. Someone takes a deep sniff, pretending to savor a meal, trying to find a shred of comfort in illusion. A hoarse voice speaks from the dark. If only there was a bit more porridge. Just a little. No one answers. Here, pleas have no value. Each person locks themselves inside the prison of their own hunger. You feel your lips crack, bleeding. Your tongue laps over them, the metallic tang making your stomach twist again. Unbelievably, the taste of blood in your mouth makes you remember what it felt like to truly eat. Someone beside you bends down, rummaging through the pile of straw in the corner, maybe searching for something, a crumb, a fallen barley grain, or some stray insect crawling past. His hands are thin like iron hooks, trembling, groping in the dark. He stops, looks up, his eyes meeting yours. No words are spoken, but both of you know. If there's something to eat, he won't share. That truth doesn't make you angry. Here, there is no we, only I, and each person's empty stomach. From afar, the wind howls through the iron door cracks, carrying a bone-piercing chill. It slips through hair, through torn clothes, straight into flesh. Hunger and cold merge, leaving you unsure what you're trembling from anymore. Your body begins to curl up, limbs ice cold. You think about if you collapse, would someone steal your porridge? Maybe they would. Maybe they'd share the last drops from your bowl, like beasts dividing a carcass. A frightening thought, but not an unreasonable one. Hunger turns everyone into primal creatures. Somewhere, you hear teeth grinding. You don't know whose. Maybe teeth chattering from cold, or maybe someone imagining food in their mouth. The sound makes you shiver. You lean your head against the wall, the stone freezing your scalp numb, but at least it helps you forget your empty belly for a moment. Your eyelids grow heavy, but each time you're about to slip into sleep, your stomach twists violently, yanking you back to reality. Hunger has its own memory. It won't let you forget it for even a second. You open your eyes, staring into the darkness ahead, and for the first time you realize the sound of hunger isn't just yours. It echoes through the room, like a hoarse, endless choir. That sound blends with breath, with chains clinking, creating the slow melody of souls being devoured by time. You smile faintly, a soundless smile. That smile fades into the cold air, merging with the orchestra of hunger, small and meaningless, like a weak, low note in the never-ending song of the dungeon. Heavy breathing from an empty stomach, each inhale like a cold blade stabbing straight into your chest. You curl up, trying to keep what little warmth remains, but the damp air of the stone dungeon has no space for life. Your chest rises and falls weakly, every breath dragging out a wheeze from a body running out of strength. The stench of human bodies, rust, and spoiled porridge coils together, slipping into your lungs, making you want to vomit but leaving nothing to bring up. The empty belly howls in waves, the stomach seeming to eat itself while you try to swallow air, hoping to fill the desperate void. No one in the cell dares breathe loudly. Your breath sounds clear in the silence, like a confession that you're still alive, and therefore still have to suffer. In the corner, an old prisoner sits motionless, his body dried to sticks, his breath so faint you think he's dead. But sometimes his shoulders still rise and fall slightly, and the wheeze escapes, slow and laboured, like wind whistling through dry branches. You look at him, then back down at your own hands, blue veins raised, skin darkened like old wood, each knuckle trembling without pause. Your body has become a machine left with only one function: breathing. Breathing to prolong hunger. You feel as if each breath you take is being strangled by the cold halfway down, never reaching your lungs. At times you try to hold your breath for as long as you can, to see how your body reacts, and when the air floods back in, it hurts like being stabbed but feels strangely good. At least you can still feel you exist. In the dark, the breaths blend together, deep, heavy, broken, forming the rhythm of hell. Each person inhales as if swallowing despair. Each person exhales as if releasing a piece of their dwindling soul. You turn your head, see a young prisoner sitting by the wall, his hands clutching his head, his breath quick, ragged. He breathes like someone on the edge of madness, eyes wide, lips trembling. You know that feeling well. When hunger and cold meet, they squeeze the heart, making each breath heavy as stone. You try to speak, but your throat is parched, the sound that comes out like wind sliding through your teeth. No one talks to anyone anymore. The only language here is breathing, hunger, and the groans of bodies. A long breath comes from somewhere in the dark, drawn out and choked, then disappears. The air seems to solidify, heavy as fog, pressing down on everyone. You inhale, and it feels like you're inhaling someone else's breath, the same sweat, the same fear. Perhaps you really are breathing them in, because the room is too small, nothing clean left to share. A younger prisoner across the way suddenly starts coughing, a dry, rasping cough, echoing off the stone. He clutches his chest, gasping, each inhale like steel wire scraping through his lungs. The cough makes a few others frown, but no one helps. Here, everyone is breathing on their last bit of air. No one dares waste more to care for another. You shift slightly, trying to find a clearer spot, but there is none. The space is tight, human breath thick as smoke. You exhale, and your own breath blows back into your face, cold and wet, like an invisible slap from the dungeon. Your eyelids grow heavy, your head spinning from lack of oxygen. For a fleeting moment, you think you hear a whisper, not sure if it's from someone else or from your own mind. A faint voice, like a soul's last breath. Don't stop. Inhale. Breathe. You open your eyes, but see only darkness, the faint shapes of bodies moving slowly, like shadows forced to live. Their breaths merge into one dense cloud, drifting sluggishly in the low-ceilinged cell. The torch nearby weakens, its light flickering then dimming completely, leaving total darkness. In that darkness, The sound of breathing becomes clearer than ever, like hundreds of heartbeats at once, but all out of rhythm. You lean your head back, trying to take a deep breath, but your chest tightens, stabbing pain, then a weak cough. The cough makes your head spin, your chest ache like being struck. Each time you cough, you feel as if you're falling deeper into this pit of foul air. You think of the air outside, where there is wind, snow, even the smell of warm fire, then wonder if you can still remember the scent of life. A cold draft slips through the iron door, brushing your face. You inhale quickly, deeply, feeling it run through your throat, freezing but sweet, like a drop of water in the desert. You hold your breath, trying to keep it in your lungs like a fragile treasure, afraid that if you exhale it will never return. But finally, your lungs force you to let go, and that breath vanishes, merging into the thick darkness of the stone dungeon with dozens of other breaths slowly fading from this world without anyone noticing. Each prisoner looks at the others like rivals for a meal, their eyes no longer holding even a trace of humanity. In the thick air of dampness and despair, a single glance is enough to make someone's heart race, not knowing if the other intends to snatch the bowl of porridge from their hands. Figures flicker under the weak torchlight like living shadows, everyone bowing their heads, but their eyes constantly shifting, scanning, measuring, on guard. You sit there, clutching your bowl of porridge to your chest, not daring to eat quickly, not daring to breathe hard. A drop of sweat falls from your forehead, mixing into the cold porridge steam, and you know every person around is counting the seconds as you raise the spoon to your mouth. It feels like a pack of wolves circling, but without growls, only silent gazes sharp as knives. Each time you lift the spoon, several pairs of eyes move at once. Someone licks their lips, someone clenches their fists, someone tilts their head slightly, and all of them are the same, no longer human, but raw instinct teetering on collapse. You sip a small mouthful, hearing clearly the water in the bowl shift, the sound echoing in the still air like a death knell. A prisoner next to you shifts slightly, saying nothing, but his eyes say everything. You know he's hungry. You know what he's thinking. Hunger makes people cruelly intelligent. It teaches observation, waiting, guessing when the other will weaken to strike. You try to avoid his gaze, but it sticks to you, clinging like a fly to rotting meat. In the far corner, two other prisoners have started arguing, not loudly but with sharp whispers. One insists his porridge was stolen, the other denies it. Then suddenly a punch flies out, dry and weak, like hitting with bone. A groan bursts, then silence, only heavy breathing left. No one intervenes. Everyone watches, but no one steps in. Here, life is counted in spoonfuls of porridge, and interfering with someone's food is no different from signing your own death sentence. You see the beaten man lying still, blood spilling from his mouth, red mixing with porridge on the floor. Another prisoner secretly reaches out, scraping up the remaining porridge, licking it quickly without blinking. The sight makes you nauseous, but at the same time, a part of you understands, because if you were in that position, you might do the same. The guard's footsteps echo from the hallway, heavy and slow, but no one looks back. They know the guards don't care. They're not coming to feed, nor to help. They're only here to count, to make sure the number of dead hasn't exceeded the allowed limit. You hear metal clinking, then the faint laughter of the guards drifting in, mocking and distant. In the darkness, you suddenly see the truth. In this place, even the human heart is imprisoned, bound tighter than chains. No one trusts anyone, no one cares for anyone. Each person sits against the wall like an animal cornered, clutching their small portion of food like their life. You remember the day you were brought here, when you still thought you'd make friends, share to survive together. But after just a few nights, that thought was strangled. A spoonful of porridge can turn you from a person into a monster. You've seen them hide porridge in their sleeves, seen them wait for others to sleep, then reach over, seen them fight over a fuller spoon. You've stayed awake entire nights, afraid your next meal would be stolen. Now, you understand that in the dungeon, trust is rarer than light. An old prisoner sitting near the wall laughs dryly. I once shared my food with someone. He said he'd repay me. The next day, he died, and I lost my porridge. No one replies, but everyone understands. The old man's laugh is dry, echoing then vanishing immediately, leaving a heavy void. You glance at your bowl, still half full. Your palms begin to sweat. The feeling of being stared at makes your neck burn. You turn slightly, shielding the bowl with your arm, sipping quickly, the cold porridge sliding down your throat, tasteless, leaving only the shame of eating in fear. You swallow fast, cough, a drop of porridge splattering out, falling to the floor, and in an instant, a hand reaches out, a thin, bony hand snatching it up, licking it clean. You pull back, gripping your bowl tighter, your heart pounding. The cell grows quiet again, but in that silence, everyone knows. They're waiting for the moment, waiting for someone to weaken, to grab the last scraps of life. And among all those eyes, you suddenly realize you're no better than them, because deep down, you too are waiting for someone's hand to falter, so you can take one more spoonful. Someone licks his bowl until it's bare wood, and that sound, soft, wet, echoes in the dungeon like a desperate confession. The tip of his tongue runs over the cracked wood, tracing each dark groove of the years, trying to find some trace of porridge soaked deep in the grain. He closes his eyes, trembling, as if savouring the most luxurious flavour in the world. But in truth, there's nothing but the sour smell of rotting wood, the stench of sweat, the cold metallic tang of iron chains. His hand grips the bowl tightly, knuckles white, shaking as if afraid someone might snatch away that priceless object. Around him, others watch, no one saying a word. A few eyes follow, not out of disgust, but out of longing, of the desire to do the same. Because who hasn't licked a bowl when hunger has gone beyond the limits of dignity? You watch him, a vague feeling rising in you between pity and fear. The licking continues, slow, persistent, as if those dry wooden ridges could yield one more drop of porridge, one more barley grain, one more illusion of fullness. You can hear the sound of his tongue scraping, rustling, mixing with his ragged breath, like wind whistling through the teeth of a dying man. He pauses for a moment, lifts his head, his eyes cloudy, the whites yellowed, his lips trembling as if to speak, then lowers again, continuing his miserable task. He licks so thoroughly that the wood becomes polished, tiny splinters of the bowl breaking off under his tongue, mixing with saliva, then disappearing down his throat. You don't know if he's still eating porridge, or eating the bowl itself. In another corner, another prisoner watches, his eyes deep and black like a well. He doesn't lick, but his hand also runs lightly around his own bowl, as if calculating whether anything is left stuck. He wipes a circle with his index finger, then licks quickly, eyes closed, his face solemn as if in prayer. A faint moan rises from somewhere, you don't know from whom. Perhaps someone else trying to restrain their hunger at the sight, or maybe it's the sigh of the soul of this place itself. The smell of people, of porridge, of mould blends into a thick mixture, as if the walls themselves are absorbing it. You feel your breath growing heavy, every gulp of air into your lungs carrying the scent of watery porridge. The torch flickers, casting light on the face of the man licking his bowl, the yellow glow striking his hollow cheeks, sharpening the jut of his cheekbones, slick with sweat. At the corner of his mouth, a white streak of dried porridge. He doesn't wipe it, leaving it stuck on his skin like proof of existence. After a while, he stops, looks down at his bowl, its bottom gleaming under the firelight, smooth, bare. He lets out a crooked smile, half mad, half lucid, then mutters something unclear. Someone softly asks, "Did you find anything?" He doesn't answer, just hugs the bowl to his chest, as if afraid someone will snatch it back. The answer is in his eyes. He found nothing, but licking made him believe he still had something to hold on to. You turn away, but the sound of licking still echoes, haunting. It sticks in your mind, replaying over and over, each time making your stomach clench harder. That sound, to outsiders, might be trivial, grotesque, but here, it's the sound of life, the sound of those still strong enough to try, even if only to scrape up what's no longer there. You look up at the dungeon ceiling, where drops of water fall steadily, one by one, onto the floor like the ticking of time. Each drop is a day passing, and you don't know how many thousands of drops you've heard. The man licking his bowl is now silent. He sets the bowl down on the ground, tapping it lightly, producing a dull thud. The gesture startles several others, eyes immediately turning to the bowl. But he doesn't share, just runs his hand once more along the rim, then leans his head back against the wall. His lips are still wet, but no longer trembling. Perhaps he's exhausted, or found a moment of peace in the small illusion that he has just finished eating. You look around. Everyone has their heads bowed, each in a corner, each with their own way of fighting hunger. Some take deep breaths to trick their bodies. Some lick their fingers. Some sit motionless, eyes unfocused, staring into nothing. You slowly raise your hand to the edge of your own bowl, hesitate a moment, then also run your tongue lightly around. Your tongue touches the dry, rough wood, nothing left but the bitter, mouldy taste. But in that moment, your stomach seems to go quiet, giving way to a strange calm, a fleeting moment. But enough to make you believe, at least, you're not dead of hunger yet. The dry crumbs of porridge stuck to the rim of the bowl are treated like treasures, and in the dim light of the stone dungeon, the scene looks like a silent ritual where each prisoner bows their head, carefully scraping off every trace of food that has turned to dust. You look around and see bony hands holding bowls, blackened nails trembling, gently tapping the wooden edge to pry off the tiniest bits left behind. The tapping sounds soft, like rain, but in your heart it echoes loud enough to sting. Someone runs a finger around the rim of the bowl, then brings it to his mouth, closing his eyes as if to imagine he's tasting something sweet. But when he opens them, there's only an empty, soulless stare. Hunger makes every movement slow, precise, as if they're afraid a single slip could spill their very life. Each has their way. Some tap, some scrape. Some use their teeth to lightly bite around the rim to loosen hardened porridge. These sounds merge into a strange rhythm, steady, patient, like the grinding teeth of time. You lift your own bowl, tilting it, the torchlight revealing a tiny streak of porridge dried like a thread. You scrape it lightly with your nail, the crumb breaking apart. The fragment clings to your fingertip, small as dust, yet you still bring it to your lips, licking it. The taste is no longer porridge, just rotten wood, iron, moss, and the damp smell of the dungeon. Yet your body trembles a little, as if it still recognizes it once was food. In a distant corner, someone is prying off dried porridge from the bowl of a dead man. His corpse still lies there, arms hanging, eyes staring at the ceiling. His bowl rests beside him, its rim still holding a faint smear of old porridge. And the other man doesn't hesitate to lean down, licking it with his tongue. No one stops him, no one says a word. Here, the line between survival and sin dissolved long ago. Another man lets out a laugh, dry, twisted, then continues gnawing the rim of his bowl as if eating the wood. The sound of teeth scraping the bowl chills you, echoing through the cell. You see his lips bleeding, but he doesn't stop. Hunger makes people forget not only morals, but pain itself. Each faint bite echoes like a knock at the door of madness. After a while, the air grows thicker. No one speaks. No one looks at each other. Only the sounds of nails, teeth, and breath. The breath of dozens combined, warm and damp, makes the air even more stifling. You feel your throat dry, your tongue sticking to the roof of your mouth, and your stomach twisting like an awakened beast. You know there's nothing left to eat, yet you can't tear your eyes from these motions. Scraping, licking, gnawing, swallowing. They repeat over and over, hypnotic, merciless, holding a sick beauty of survival. A younger prisoner softly says, "If there's still porridge tomorrow," his voice weak, broken. No one answers, because no one believes in tomorrow. There is only today, this moment, this morsel. One grain of porridge equals the price of hope. One smear of leftover food is the reason to breathe a few more hours. In your head, the question echoes, how far will humans go when starved? But you don't dare think further, because you're doing the same. You lower your head, lightly biting the rim of your bowl, the cold wood, the salt of blood seeping into your mouth. You close your eyes, trying to imagine you're eating bread, but the illusion fades as quickly as steam. You lick the blood from your lips, then let out a small smile, the smile of someone who knows they've fallen into the abyss but still pretends they haven't hit the bottom. The last torch is dying, its light shrinking into a dim halo glinting off sunken eyes. Darkness slowly swallows everything, leaving only the faint tapping of nails on wood, a weak sound like the final heartbeat of those still trying to cling to life, with a few dried crumbs of porridge turned to dust on the cold rim of a bowl. Rats fight with men for scraps of food, and in that cold dungeon, it's hard to tell which one is more desperate. Their tiny feet scratch against the stone floor each night. The sound of claws, soft squeaks slipping into the prisoner's restless sleep. You lie in the dark, eyes wide open, watching the flicker of the torchlight reflect in their round, gleaming eyes. They're not afraid of people. In fact, they seem familiar with the scent of hunger. A fat black rat, the size of a fist, scurries past your feet, carrying a dry piece of porridge in its mouth. Instantly, another prisoner lunges, grabbing after it, but he's too slow, catching only its shadow. Footsteps slam, a grunt of pain, then silence. Every gaze turns toward where the creature ran. Everyone knows it just carried away something more precious than gold in this place. The rats are clever. They live in the walls, hide under the floor, waiting until the prisoners doze off before crawling out to search around bowls, around mouths, where sometimes a drop of porridge or a crumb of bread still clings. Once, you woke to a warm tickle on your lips, opened your eyes, and saw a rat licking the dried blood from your mouth, mistaking it for food. You screamed, flinging it off. It hit the wall, dropped to the floor. But no one cared, no one asked. They only glanced your way, then closed their eyes again, listening to the scratching sounds around them as if it were just another part of the night. Some couldn't take it anymore, and began trapping rats with strips of cloth, bits of wood tied into nooses. They'd sit for hours in the dark, holding their breath, waiting. When they heard the faint tap-tap, they'd pull hard. Sometimes the string broke, the rat escaped, sometimes they caught it, and when that happened, the room fell into tense silence. All eyes turned toward the one holding the rat, gazes filled with both hunger and horror. Some licked their lips, some swallowed hard, some turned away, knowing what was coming. The man with the rat didn't hesitate. He slammed its head against the wall, a sharp crack, then nothing. He sank down, staring at the tiny body trembling in his hand, then ran his tongue along the streak of fresh blood on his finger. That metallic taste lit his eyes with madness. He stuffed the rat inside his shirt, covering it, afraid the others might see. But the scent of blood spread fast, thick, and the thirst flared in everyone's eyes. Another man crawled closer, his voice rasping, "Give me a piece." No one answered, only the sound of swallowing filled the dark. After a moment, the faint smell of burnt meat drifted from the corner, where he was using a stone to roast the rat. That smell, if it could be called that, spread through the room, making every stomach tighten. Some groaned, some clawed the walls, some even crawled closer just to inhale the smoke. He ate quickly, swallowing hard, tears running down his face from the heat, but he didn't stop. When only bones remained, he licked each one clean. Another man snapped, lunging forward, snatching a bone, biting down crack, a dry, brittle sound. No one stopped him, no one judged. Here, sin had become part of the meal. You turn away, but the smell of char still clings to your senses, stabbing into your brain, making you dizzy. Your stomach screams. You wonder if it were you, would you do the same? The answer doesn't need to be spoken, your body already knows. That night, the rats came back, smaller, smarter. They knew the people no longer had the strength to chase, and the people knew they no longer had the strength to endure. A silent war began, no screams, only hissing, teeth gnashing, claws scraping stone, and the faint human gasps of despair. A young prisoner, unable to sleep, sat staring into the dark corner where the rats usually appeared. When one crept out, he lunged, grabbed, but the creature was faster, biting back, its small teeth sharp. Blood burst out, warm, running down his wrist. He let go, watching it scurry off, then laughed a dry, cracked laugh. He raised his wrist, licking the dripping blood, that salty metallic taste making him tilt his head back and laugh harder, the sound echoing before fading, melting into the scratching of rats and the weak breaths of those waiting for their turn in the dark. A prisoner tried to catch a rat but failed, got bitten, and in that instant, his faint cry echoed through the dungeon like a curse. He lunged forward, hands snatching at the small black shadow darting across the damp straw. The rat squealed sharply, its shrill cry bouncing off the cold stone walls. He squeezed harder, but the tiny creature slipped through his bony fingers, leaving a streak of dark red blood across his wrist. He looked down and saw the rat's teeth buried deep in his flesh, blood spilling out bright, hot, the first real blood he had seen in days. The pain dropped him to his knees, but his eyes stayed locked on the rat fleeing into the darkness. He panted hard, his hand clenching, the wetness between his fingers pulsing in rhythm with his racing heart. The scent of fresh blood spread, real blood, the kind no human body could ever ignore. Around him, a few heads lifted. No one asked, "Are you all right?" They just watched, silent, eyes gleaming in the dim torchlight. Another prisoner crept closer, unable to hide the hunger in his gaze, not for the man, but for the blood. He swallowed dryly and whispered, voice trembling like wind, "There's no smell sweeter than blood in this place." The words froze the air. The bitten man looked around and saw the stares fixed on him like predators catching the scent of life. He stepped back, clutching his wrist, but the blood still dripped, sliding between his fingers, falling onto the stone floor. Each drop hit with a tiny tack, echoing across the cell. Someone licked their lips, someone else closed their eyes and inhaled deeply, imagining the cold metallic taste filling their mouth. A frail man with hollow eyes crawled closer, whispering as if pleading, "Just a drop, please, just one drop." The bitten man shook his head, voice hoarse, "Go away." But the other's hand crept forward anyway, trembling not from fear, but desire. Just one touch, and he would have licked it clean. Then a faint clink. The bitten man's wooden bowl fell, rolling a few times before stopping at the other's feet. Both froze. The torchlight flickered, revealing the empty bowl, a thin streak of blood spreading across it, mixing with old porridge stains. Time stopped for a heartbeat. Then, by instinct, the man lunged, grabbed the bowl, and licked. He licked every trace, trembling, panting, like an animal drinking water. The metallic smell spread thin, sharp. The bitten man stared, stunned, unable to react. The dungeon fell silent, except for the soft, rhythmic sound of licking. When the bowl was returned, its surface gleamed, bare, spotless. The man who had licked it looked up, his mouth red, a smear of blood on his lip, and in his eyes, something had awakened. No one spoke. The bitten man rose slowly, walked to the corner, holding his wrist, not looking back. The blood hadn't stopped. It trickled down, one drop at a time. Another prisoner nearby stared, tongue flicking across cracked lips. The silence now was not peace, it was tension, tight as wire. Hunger was no longer the only thing alive here, it had birthed another thirst, something more primal, more obscene. In the dark, every eye quietly followed the last traces of blood on his hand. He felt it, the watching, and tried to hide it, which only made it worse. He wrapped his wrist with a strip of ragged cloth, but the stain kept spreading, deepening to brownish black. The metallic scent lingered, thick and strange in the air, a cruel invitation. The night stretched endlessly. The sound of rat feet returned. The small creatures no longer feared the people. They ran between legs, over rags and hair, vanishing into shadows. But no one chased, no one caught. Everyone sat still, drained, with hollow eyes drifting toward the line between reason and instinct. And when the last breath of the torch flickered out, only the scent of iron and the heavy slowing rhythm of hearts remained, as if, in that dungeon, blood and hunger had finally learned how to live together inside a body that no longer knew what it meant to be human. Night falls, and everyone dreams of a lavish feast. In the cold darkness of the stone dungeon, dreams are the only warmth left for people to cling to, even if they're just illusions. You curl up, back against the damp wall, your murky breath mingling with the breathing of the others. But in your mind, you're seated at a meal blazing with firelight. On the table lies roasted meat, bread, red wine shimmering in silver cups. The rich aroma drifts out, mixing with the sound of laughter and chatter, and you see yourself reaching for a glistening brown piece of meat, fat running down your fingers. You lift it to your mouth, bite, feeling it melt soft, the sweetness of meat and the spice of wine wrapping around each other. Your stomach stops growling, your breathing eases, your eyes close in peace. But just a second later, a dry cough from somewhere pulls you back. The darkness thickens, cold and heavy like a wet blanket on your chest. You open your eyes and see only stone, moss, and people around you gaunt shadows lying still, twitching now and then from the cold. In the corner, someone's lips are still moving in his sleep, mumbling, "Give me another piece. The meat's so tender." He's dreaming just like you were. Another man smiles, a wrinkled smile, eyes closed, hand lifting slightly in the air as if raising a cup. Some dream of wine, some dream of porridge, some dream of hot steaming bread. All those dreams together form a banquet in the dark, a place where frail bodies share a feast with minds worn thin. The heavy breathing, mixed with faint whispers, creates an eerie resonance, like a hymn for illusions. You close your eyes again, hoping the dream returns, hoping the smell of roasted meat fills your nose again, but instead you only smell mold. Still, your starved brain tries to conjure images, a bowl of hot soup, sweet pastries, bright red apples, all appearing and fading like steam. You see your hand reaching out to grab, but there's nothing there but cold air. Hunger blurs dream and reality, making it impossible to tell what's imagined and what's real. In the corner, a muffled sob rises, small but so real it squeezes your heart. Someone has just woken up, his hands still clutching empty air, muttering, I already ate. Don't take it from me." Then he looks around, realizing there's nothing but hollow faces staring back. He chuckles dryly, slumps down, his gaze drifting far away. The dream has betrayed him, as it betrays everyone. An old prisoner speaks softly, voice as thin as wind. When you're hungry enough to dream of eating, it means you're almost too weak to dream at all. No one answers, but the words hang heavy. Someone nearby curls tighter, whispering prayers, hoping the night passes quickly. But here, night never passes quickly. It stretches like a wound that won't close. You hear dripping water, steady, like a slow countdown for those waiting to die. Suddenly there's a rustle, a man bolts upright, eyes wild. He shouts, "I see bread, right here." He crawls, grasping, snatching up a piece of straw, shoving it into his mouth, chewing frantically. Then he stops, spits it out, and bursts into tears. "Straw. It's all straw." He sobs, his voice breaking, trembling, then twisting into mad laughter. That laughter spreads, echoing off the walls, making a few people flinch. No one says anything. They all understand his dream just shattered. You turn your face away, staring into nothing, trying to imagine the feast again, trying to hold it in your mind like a scrap of light. You picture full plates, overflowing cups, smiling faces, luxuries you've forgotten the real feeling of. And in that moment, you understand, dreams aren't for hope. They're just to help a person die a little slower. Even so, you still dream. Because in this stone dungeon, dreams are the only thing that can't be stripped away, at least not until hunger turns the mind to ash, and no one remembers the taste of illusions anymore. Waking up, you see nothing but a bowl of sour porridge and trash, the warm dream from last night vanishing like smoke. The stench of spoiled gruel mixed with the dampness of the stone walls makes you want to vomit. The first breath of morning isn't air, but the rot and mildew settling into your lungs. You sit up, your back aching, bones cracking. A cold mist creeps through the cracks in the wall, clinging to your hair, your clothes, making everything wet and sticky. The wooden bowl before you, the thing you held like treasure last night, now lies bare, a layer of mouldy green porridge clinging to the bottom, covered in white, cloudy scum. A few tiny flies buzz around it, finding their own feast where humanity has lost all hope. You watch them without even the strength to feel disgust. Beside you, someone has already woken. He's quietly holding his bowl, scraping off the dried porridge stuck to the rim, and bringing it to his mouth, chewing slowly, grimacing, but still swallowing. Every movement he makes is deliberate, as if he's performing a sacred ritual where faith itself means not wasting a single grain. The sound of his swallowing echoes clearly in the silent dungeon, like pebbles sliding down a dry throat. When he finishes, he runs his tongue along the rim of the bowl, then sets it carefully before him, bowing his head and sighing, as though content to have survived another morning. The others remain still, eyes half open, watching him as though witnessing something holy and cruel at once. You lower your gaze to your own bowl. The old porridge has hardened, its surface blotched like rotting flesh. You hesitate, but hunger doesn't allow hesitation. The stench rises as you stir the bottom with your spoon, the thick paste breaking apart into clumps. Your throat burns dry, your stomach twists, and you know that no matter how much you loathe it, you'll eat. You take a deep breath, bring the spoon to your lips, and close your eyes. The sourness bites your tongue, the mold creeps to your brain, making you shudder. But you swallow anyway, because what else is there? A second bite, then a third. You taste nothing but slime. Sometimes your teeth hit something hard, maybe a grain husk, maybe a splinter from the bowl, maybe something else, but you don't stop. In the corner, another prisoner rummages through the trash bits of rags, old bones, ash and barley husks thrown away. He picks through each piece, holding it under the flickering flame, inspecting it like a miner panning for gold in filth. When he finds something he can chew, he puts it in his mouth, gnawing slowly, his eyes closing in a strange sort of pleasure. You hear the dry crunching sound and feel something rise in you, a mix of pity and fear, because you know it won't be long before you do the same. A guard passes by the iron bars, snorts and smirks. He says something mocking in his coarse tongue, then tosses down a piece of stale bread, white with mould. Instantly, 3 or 4 people lunge for it. Footsteps clash, hands collide, a cry bursts out. The bread falls to the stone floor, splitting in two, and in that heartbeat, everyone dives. One hand grabs it first, another bites it, blood spurts, but the man doesn't let go. He shoves the bread and blood into his mouth, chewing wildly, eyes wide with panic. When it's over, he steps back, panting, his hand still bleeding. The others stare, some grinding their teeth, some weeping, but none speak. The guard laughs, the sound echoing down the hall, then walks away. You watch him go, your chest empty. Anger? Shame? Or just numbness? You can't tell anymore. Only a cold feeling rises within you, like water seeping into stone. That cold doesn't belong to the air, it belongs to people. An old prisoner whispers, "He's not laughing at us, he's laughing at himself, because only here can he feel more alive than the rest." You look up, meeting the old man's ashen eyes, dull as ashes but with a faint flicker left inside. Perhaps the only thing still untouched in this place is understanding itself, the last proof that a man still knows he's losing his humanity. You turn away, staring back at your bowl of spoiled porridge. The steam is gone, but the smell still lingers, thick and sour, clinging to your nose. And you know, no matter how hard you try, that smell will still be here tomorrow, because it doesn't just live in the bowl anymore. It's in your breath, in your skin, in everyone's body, the scent of a life long forgotten. A prisoner whispers that he once saw soup with real meat, and that remark spreads through the dark like a faint light across a sea at night. At first, no one believes him. Only a few eyes flicker, then go out, like the reflex of someone who has heard too many illusions. But then, when he repeats it again, voice trembling but more certain, "I saw. There was a real piece of meat, floating in the guard's bowl. I could smell it." The whole dungeon falls silent. Every breath stops. A strange stillness spreads, heavy enough to make you hear your own heartbeat. He doesn't look at anyone, his gaze fixed as if recalling, his cracked lips moving, trying to describe. The meat was tender, fat, dripping, brown and glossy, fragrant. I could smell it from afar. His voice chokes, then he gives a hoarse laugh, shaking. "They ate like gods, and I only watched." Someone else asks quietly, voice dry, "Are you sure? Not imagining it?" He shakes his head emphatically, spitting, his eyes lighting up, mad but sincere. "No, I saw it clearly. There was smoke rising, fat running down his hand." Those words are like throwing a spark onto the embers. Immediately, the other prisoners begin to stir, whispers rising, small at first, then growing. "Real meat? Fat? What did it smell like? Did they give any away?" Each question rings out like a burning desire, making the once dead space shudder back to life. But not gentle life, rather the frenzy of hunger. You sit in the corner, listening, and see in everyone's eyes a dangerous light, like a torch burning with the oil of despair. A younger prisoner, who's been silent for days, suddenly speaks. If it's true, if the guards have meat, there must be a way to get it. His voice is low but clear. Some turn to him, half afraid, half curious. He continues, voice trembling but firmer. They treat us like the walking dead. They think nothing of us. But if there's a chance, just one bite. Just one bite. People fall silent, eyes meeting, silently passing along the same thought no one dares voice. Hunger warps the mind, and all limits begin to dissolve. You feel your own breathing grow heavier, your heart pounding as if afraid of the thought just born in your head. An old man slumps, laughs hoarsely, and says, "I used to eat stewed beef. There was greens, garlic, even bread to dip in the sauce. That smell." He stops mid-sentence, tears falling without him noticing. The room listens like it's hearing a fairy tale. The sauce was golden and thick, the meat melted, one spoonful, and you felt happiness. His voice fades and dies. No one speaks, but those images carve themselves into everyone's mind. One by one, people begin to remember. Someone whispers, "I used to eat fish, the smell of salt and smoke." Another replies, "I remember hot soup, with potatoes, with greens." Each reminiscence drives a knife into the empty stomach, turning hunger from feeling to real pain. You close your eyes, and an image of a table appears: father, mother, laughter, the smell of the hearth. You open your eyes, tears welling but not falling. Your throat is dry as stone. The whispers continue like prayers in a church of starving souls. In the dark, the prisoner who told the story of meat in the soup keeps talking and won't stop, as if afraid the dream will evaporate if he falls silent. "I saw the piece of meat. I swear it was real. It was the size of a fist," he says, eyes bright, voice trembling. Another prisoner interjects, "If it's real, if they cook for us just once, I would do anything." He speaks half dreaming, half promising, then gives a dry laugh. The laughter spreads, weak and crooked, then dies away. A man near the door whispers, "Maybe that meat was human meat." The words freeze the air, eyes that had brightened with hope snuff out. The storyteller falters, mouth agape, unable to speak. Some shudder, a few glance at one another. The thought is horrifying, and no one dares to deny it because deep inside, something tells them it's entirely possible. Here, every boundary has broken down. The smells of blood, porridge, and old human flesh mix until nothing is distinguishable. The storyteller bows his head, silent for a long time, then bursts into sobs. His tears fall into the dust, and his choking sobs shatter like stones tumbling into an abyss. You sit still, listening to that crying, and in your chest a realization comes. Sometimes hope can kill, because when you believe that piece of meat is real, you let your hunger become a monster no one can tame. Rumors spread. You could bribe the guards for food. At first, it was only a weak whisper, half believed, half doubted, coming from a dark corner where a few old men huddled together, warming themselves on their own breath. But like fire thrown into dry grass, the rumor spread so fast that within hours the entire dungeon knew. One of the guards, last night, he got a silver ring from cell number 3, someone whispered. This morning, he brought down a bowl of porridge thicker than usual. It smelled of fat. The words fat, thicker, real, echoed through the dark cell and made every gaze turn toward the speaker. Even those lying motionless from exhaustion tried to lift their heads. Every breath stopped, then swelled in a faint, feverish excitement. "Are you sure? Did you see it? Did he share any?" The questions came in waves, heavy with a desperate kind of hope, spoken by voices that had forgotten what believing felt like. The storyteller only shrugged. "I don't know, but I saw him smile, a real smile." That alone seemed to brighten the dungeon a little. In the darkness, that tiny spark of hope flickered to life, like the last ember refusing to die. No one slept that night. They discussed what could be traded. A rusty ring, a scrap of metal, a strip of cloth, even a tooth, the only thing left that might still have value. A middle-aged man, once a merchant, said softly, "I have an iron ring. My wife used to wear it. He rubbed the ring, eyes unfocused, and sighed. If it could buy a bowl of real porridge, I'd give it without regret. The man beside him nodded, lips trembling. I have an old coin, if they'd take it. Then someone laughed dryly. If we had anything to bribe with, we wouldn't be here. Yet even in his cynicism, his eyes glimmered, because deep down, humans can never fully kill hope. You sat still, listening, feeling something strange rise inside, warm and bitter, like drinking wine mixed with ash. The thought of real food made your heart race, though reason whispered that it was only the joke of despair. In the corner, a younger prisoner, his face hollow but his eyes still alive, said quietly, "I'll try." Everyone turned to look. No one stopped him, no one encouraged him, only silent gazes from people too drained to dream. "I have a small chain, real silver. I hid it in my shoe." He pulled out a thin chain, blackened with age. When the torchlight hit it, it still gleamed faintly. Someone looked at it, as if seeing a sliver of the moon. "Who will you trade with?" "The night guard. He walks the right corridor. Every time he stops, I hear the clink of his cup." His voice was low but steady. He clenched the chain tightly, his eyes no longer those of the hopeless, but of a man making a deal. That entire night, no one slept. When the sound of the guard's boots echoed down the hallway, everyone held their breath. Torchlight spilled through the bars, stretching the guard's shadow long across the wall. He whistled, arrogantly, his boots striking the stone with each step. The young prisoner pressed himself to the bars, trembling. "Hey," he called softly. No answer. Only when the guard slowed did the sound of his breathing drift faintly from the other side. "What do you want?" "Food. For this." The prisoner's hand reached out, the silver chain glinting in the torchlight. The guard squinted, smirked, and tapped his spear against the bars. "You think I'm stupid? You give me that, what do you get?" The prisoner bowed his head, voice shaking but firm. "One thick bowl of porridge. Just one." A pause. Then the guard chuckled. "All right. Give it here." He reached his hand through. The chain slipped from the prisoner's grasp, shimmered once, and vanished. Inside, everyone held their breath, waiting. But the guard only laughed, turned, and walked away, his boots clattering down the corridor. No one spoke, no one dared. Only heavy breathing filled the cell. After a while, the young prisoner leaned his forehead against the bars, blood seeping from where he'd struck the metal. He didn't cry, he just sat there. An old man beside him murmured, "At least, you dared to hope." No one replied. The dungeon sank into silence again, broken only by the steady drip of water from the ceiling, blending with the hollow growl of empty stomachs. By dawn, the young man was still sitting there, fingers wrapped around the bars, eyes wide, staring down the hallway where the man with the iron boots had gone, as if waiting for him to return, not to give back the chain, but only to prove that the promise, though false, had once existed in this world. Someone chews on the leather strap from his shoe to fight the hunger. The grinding sound of his teeth scraping against the dry leather echoes like insects gnawing wood in the night. He sits against the wall, back hunched, hands trembling as he holds the worn strap, his sunken, cloudy eyes still shining with desperate resolve. The shoe that once carried him forward has become the only meal left. He unties the lace slowly, carefully, as if afraid it might snap, then lifts it to his mouth and bites. The first sound is a crack of splitting leather, then the dull clack of teeth hitting something hard, a dry, unsettling noise. The stench of old sweat and dirt seeps out, but he keeps chewing, grinding harder, teeth squealing. The leather is thick, stiff, unyielding, and his jaw aches, but he doesn't stop. His tongue bleeds, his lips split, yet he goes on like a man gripping his last lifeline. Beside him, a few others watch silently. A younger one asks quietly, "Does it have any taste?" He spits out a piece, panting, his voice hoarse. Smoke, sweat, and life. Then he bends down again and chews. Every bite is pain, but that pain tells him he's still alive. Another man, long still, sits up, glances around, then bends down to unlace his own shoe. "Real leather, still edible," he mutters. The sound of tearing straps fills the air, and one by one, they all follow. The sight looks like a grotesque but peaceful ritual. No orders, no fights, only the quiet of people so desperate they treat inanimate things as food. An old man trembles as he removes his shoe, tears streaking down his cheeks when his hand brushes the rough, cracked leather. "These shoes," he murmurs. "My wife patched them before they took me." He smiles faintly, then bites a small piece, chewing slowly, as if tasting a memory. In the corner, the firelight flickers over the faces wrinkled, skeletal as they chew in silence, the faint sound of teeth scraping leather like insects burrowing into rotten bark. The stench of burnt hide spreads, for someone has tried to roast it. He holds the strap over a weak flame. Smoke curls up, sharp and acrid. "It's softer if you burn it," he says, then bites. The smoke makes him cough, hacking harshly, but he keeps chewing. Another prisoner laughs dryly. "Soldiers' boots must taste better made of real leather." The remark makes a few glance up, eyes flashing a dark spark of thought. But no one speaks again. In the darkness, the smell of scorched hide and smoke mingles with the damp mold of the cell, creating a flavor without a name, foul, bitter, yet alive. Because every wisp of smoke, every shred of leather, is proof they haven't given up yet. A young prisoner chews so hard his tooth breaks, blood gushes out, but he doesn't cry, he swallows. Blood and leather mix, the metallic tang blending with the bitterness, making him dizzy. "You're eating yourself," someone whispers. He laughs, crooked, eyes red. At least there's something to chew. In the heavy stillness, that line echoes weak, but painfully true. Hunger has erased every boundary between man and beast, between food and object. Here, anything that can be bitten, chewed, becomes salvation. A stronger prisoner suddenly stands, hurling his shoe at the wall, shouting, "I had a house, a table, warm bread." The scream fades, replaced by a low groan. He sits, shaking, then picks the shoe back up and bites. You watch, throat tight, torn between nausea and fascination. You wonder if you'd be any different, if hunger gnawed for another day, another hour. But then your empty stomach twists, and the answer comes from instinct. You know that sooner or later, it'll be your turn to chew your own shoes. And by then, there'll be no difference left between the person you once were and the creature just trying to survive a few more breaths in this frozen stone pit. Some gnawed on candle wax, treating it as fat. In the corner of the dungeon, the dim light cast shadows over their hollow faces, glinting off sunken eyes that carried the gaze of beasts driven to the edge. The single candle once used by the warden to inspect the cells had become the last remaining luxury. When the guard left, leaving behind a small stump of melting wax, one prisoner silently crawled forward, his trembling hand reaching out. His fingers touched the soft, warm wax, and only one thought flashed through his mind. Fat. He lifted his finger to his tongue. The sweet, greasy taste of beeswax mixed with the smell of smoke, of burning, of humans. His eyes closed, his throat tightened, and he let out a faint moan, as if savouring a fine delicacy. Hunger had twisted every sense, and now candle wax, something no one would ever think to eat, had become life itself. The others watched, silent. Then slowly, they began to crawl closer. No one spoke, no one fought. They simply bent down, gathered fallen pieces of wax from the floor, rolled them in their palms to soften them, and shoved them into their mouths. The sound of chewing filled the air, wet, faint, and agonizing. A young man murmured, "It's like eating fat." "Yes," another whispered. "It melts, like fat in your mouth." They said it to fool themselves, to believe that what they ate could still nourish them, that it had flavor, that it resembled the meals they once knew. But everyone knew it was only an illusion. The wax was hard, unyielding, sticking to their teeth, yet they kept chewing, biting down, swallowing lumps whole. One man swallowed too fast. The wax stuck in his throat, and he began to cough violently, pounding his chest, but instead of helping, the man beside him stared at the piece of wax still clutched in his hand. Only when the coughing stopped and his hand went limp did the other snatch it up and shove it into his mouth as though it were a prize earned through patience. No one reacted, no one screamed. No one had the strength left to judge. An older man watched, muttering, "I used to light candles every night. Never thought I'd eat one." His voice trembled as his eyes fixed on the dying flame. a tiny glow on the wax like the final breath of humanity in the dark. He leaned forward, scraped a bit of molten wax with his finger, brought it to his lips, swallowed slowly, and whispered, "At least, it still tastes like light." The words fell softly, but weighed like stone. They kept eating, biting, chewing, swallowing each, holding a different reason for this grotesque act. Some believed it was fat, some medicine, some hope. Whatever they told themselves, it was only to forget the hunger devouring them from within. When the last stub of the candle went out, the cell drowned in thick darkness. Yet even without light, they kept searching, feeling along the cold stone floor, hoping to find a bit of leftover wax stuck to the wall, the ground, or even under someone's fingernail. One man found a few old drops clinging to the wall, scraped them off, and cupped them in his hands as if holding gold. He rolled them together, pressed them firm, then split the lump in half and offered the smaller piece to the man beside him. The other took it, trembling, unable to speak. They both placed it in their mouths. Both closed their eyes. Both swallowed, and for that brief moment, in the deathly cold, they felt as if they had shared a real meal. There was no meat, no salt, no fire, only a fragment of cold candle wax, but that act of sharing made the dungeon, for a fleeting heartbeat, strangely peaceful. The wind whistling through the corridor sounded like a lullaby, and somewhere in that silence you could almost feel a tiny warmth, as if a soul had just been comforted. But soon, that warmth faded. Everyone fell silent again, leaning back against the walls, their tongues still sticky with wax and smoke, knowing that before long, when hunger returned, they would begin licking the walls, the stones, or anything that might let them believe they were still eating. A desperate prisoner licked the damp stone to imagine it was salt. He knelt close to the floor, his cracked lips pressed against the freezing wall. The taste of moss, of earth, of something metallic and stale filled his mouth. But he kept licking, gently, as if savouring something precious. His tongue traced the stained patches, searching for invisible grains he believed were remnants of ancient salt crystals. Maybe there was nothing, only the scent of time and moisture, but for him, in that moment, it was the salt of life. Every time his tongue touched the stone, he imagined himself sitting at a table, a bowl of soup before him, fish, and salt sprinkled evenly over steaming meat. He swallowed hard, trying to hold on to the illusion. The man beside him frowned, then turned away. But moments later, another followed, then another. No one spoke, only silent, hunched figures moving toward the damp walls where water trickled down through cracks. The sound of licking echoed softly, rhythmically, like a strange chant of those waiting to die but still fighting to live. Someone licked and lifted his head, eyes glazed, lips trembling. "There's salt! I can taste it," he whispered, half believing, half dreaming. Another asked quietly, "Where?" He pointed, and soon more crawled there, crowding the dark corner. The cold prison wall, once just a symbol of confinement, had become the last refuge of the yearning to taste life again. An old man murmured, "They used to say salt kept men from rotting. Maybe that's why we're still breathing." His words drifted weakly, then vanished into the void, but everyone who heard fell silent. In the dark they kept licking, patient, entranced, like children searching for honey between stones. They licked until their lips bled, the blood mixing with moisture to form faint red streaks. One man laughed, a rasping, broken sound. "Now I can taste the iron of my blood, it's just like salt." The remark made a few stop, glance at him, then laugh too dry, choking laughs that dissolved into the wind howling down the corridor. Someone began to cry, licking and crying, tears mingling with the water on the wall. The salt he tasted, in the end, was his own. You sat apart, watching, your stomach tightening. Hunger was no longer just in the body, it had sunk into the mind. The whole dungeon felt like a chapel of madness, where every movement was a prayer. A young prisoner with a bruised face forced a grin. "At least, I still have taste." He said it, then bent down again, licking longer, harder, until his teeth struck stone with a sharp, dry click. Blood flowed once more, dark red, and he swallowed it as if it were a gift from God. Another collapsed, too weak to move, yet still touched the wall and brought his fingers to his lips, as though the faint scent alone could pull him back to reality. No one knew how long it went on, only that when the dim light of the torch flickered across the walls, the patches of stone had been worn smooth, the marks of human tongues, left by those who believed there was salt in the stone. Their breath rose, mixing with the dampness, thickening the air with the scent of metal and flesh. One prisoner lifted his head and asked, "If there's salt in the stone, what's inside us?" No one answered. The question drifted up, struck the ceiling, and fell like a drop of water to the floor. You looked around. The eyes that met yours were wide, dull, no longer reflecting life, only the faint glimmer of delusion. And in that moment, you understood. Hunger had turned this place into another world, where men licked stone to taste the salt of their own souls. Someone remembered the food from his hometown, telling it like a myth. In the freezing darkness of the stone dungeon, when every breath grew heavy, and stomachs growled so loud they echoed, that voice rose soft as smoke, trembling like the final breath of someone lost in a dream. Back then, his voice rasped, rough and broken, yet in that trembling tone was something strangely warm. My mother used to make amaranth soup. The broth was clear and sweet. The aroma rising from the pot painted the whole yard red with sunset. Beside it was braised fish, a small piece of pork belly, the fat melting into the white rice. Everyone nearby lifted their heads, hollow eyes flickering with a faint light. No one interrupted. They listened like children to a bedtime story. His words fell slowly, each one heavy, sinking into the air thick with human breath and mould. But when they reached the other's ears, they turned into scents, into shapes, into memories of the days when being full was still possible. My father drank rice wine, and I got the crispiest piece of fish skin, he went on, smiling a crooked, shining smile. When it rained, my mother would make porridge, sprinkle fried shallots on top. That smell of shallots, I'll remember it for life, someone whispered. In my village, we had sticky rice cakes with mung bean filling, hot, soft, sweet. His voice faltered, caught in his throat, as if speaking more might shatter the illusion. An old prisoner chuckled softly. In my hometown, they butchered pigs for the new year. The meat hung above the hearth, smoke perfuming the house. When I was hungry, just standing beneath the eaves and smelling it was enough to feel full. Everyone laughed, together thin, breathless laughs, but real. They spoke, they imagined, they remembered as if only through memory could they survive another day. In this stone prison, food had become folklore, and the storyteller, just another starved skeletal man, was now the keeper of humanity's last fire. My mother, he said, closing his eyes. When she handed me a bowl of rice, she'd sprinkle a few grains of salt on top. She said, "Eat little, but be grateful." Now I understand. Salt wasn't to make it taste better. It was to remind me I was still human. The words silenced the entire chamber. A cold wind whistled through the iron bars, but for a moment, no one felt the chill. Some bowed their heads, some nodded, some whispered prayers, as though they had just heard something sacred. Another man, his voice trembling, younger, said quietly, "I miss the smell of fried garlic." Every morning, my mother dropped it in hot oils, and the aroma spread so wide the neighbours knew we were having breakfast. Faint laughter broke out again, fragile, scattering in the dark. They spoke not to boast, but to hold on to the last memories hunger hadn't destroyed. Those dishes, those flavours, were no longer food, they were proof that another world once existed, one where they lived, laughed, and ate their fill. A man lying near the wall whispered with closed eyes, "In my village, there was crab soup." My mother ground the crabs, strained the broth, let it simmer. The smell filled the whole street. I thought I'd never forget it. His voice faded, then stopped. Another, softly continued, afraid to let the silence devour the memory. In my town, kids ran around the pot of black bean sweet soup, waiting for the first bowl. One story flowed into another, like a thin stream passing through every heart, washing away the filth of the dungeon, leaving behind a flicker of fragile light. You sat in silence, throat tight. In your mind, blurry images began to return your straw-roofed home. The smell of fresh rice, your mother's voice calling. You couldn't remember how long it had been since you'd heard that voice, since you'd smelled warm food. In this darkness, memory was the only thing keeping souls alive. Someone chuckled weakly. When I get out of here, I'll eat until I pass out. His words silenced everyone. Not because they didn't believe, but because they were afraid that believing would only break them further. Yet in that stillness, though no one spoke, every pair of eyes looked toward the same direction. The direction of imagination, where soup, meat, and bowls of white rice still existed, if only inside the memories of those slowly being forgotten in this cruel, endless winter. The group of prisoners listened, saliva dripping though there was nothing to swallow. They sat in a circle, pressed close, their backs against the cold wall, breaths mingling like wisps of smoke, forming that damp, sour scent unique to those who had spent too long in darkness. The storyteller's voice trembled with hunger, but each word that left his mouth made everyone's chest tighten. He spoke of hot, sticky rice cakes, of mornings when his mother was still young, her thin hands skillfully shaping mung bean filling. Dropping each ball into the pot of gently boiling water, the family gathered around the stove waiting. When she scooped them out, he said, eyes faintly glowing, steam rose thick, the smell of beans mixed with sugar so fragrant that just breathing it in made you feel full. No one spoke. In the silence, you could hear the sound of dry gulps spreading across the cell, each one harsh, ragged, but in rhythm. Another man, sitting nearby, closed his eyes, lips moving faintly. You mentioned sticky rice cakes. It makes me think of ash cakes from my village. Wrapped in dong leaves, boiled until the water turned black, cut open, clear, chewy, and fragrant. He exhaled, his lips cracked and bleeding, but on his face appeared a faint smile, the kind that comes from tasting something only the mind remembers. A younger man, who had been silent for days, suddenly spoke. My family used to make smoked buffalo meat. Every time my father sliced it thin and grilled it, the smoke filled the whole house. He paused, then laughed dryly. Just thinking about it, I can almost smell the fat. The laugh echoed, stretched, then died. Someone groaned, their stomach rumbling. In that moment, no one found it funny. It was the sound of instinct calling, making everyone lower their heads. An old man, hair grey and matted with filth, spoke softly, his voice like a lullaby. In my home, people cooked corn-sweet soup. They boiled it until the kernels burst open. The sweet smell filled the yard. Children ran around the pot, laughing. He closed his eyes. A single drop slid from the corner. No one knew if it was a tear or drool. His words spread through the air, slow but persistent, like the faint breath of someone clinging to life. The storyteller had begun speaking just to pass time, but the more he spoke, the stronger his voice grew, as if reigniting an old flame inside. Back then, he said, I remember the sizzling sound of fat in the pan. My mother always said, when you hear that sound, the rice is almost done. That line made the room feel a little warmer. Someone whispered, the sound of sizzling fat. I'd forgotten that. Another man trembled, clenched his hand, nails digging into skin, smiling through tears. All of them, gaunt, filthy, starving, sat there, imagining the smell of rice, the richness of meat, the stickiness of cakes, the faint spice of fried shallots. Those things were now farther away than freedom itself, but precisely for that reason, they felt more real than ever. In their imagination, they were no longer chained, no longer cold, no longer in pain. They were simply people sitting by a fire, around a meal, laughing, waiting for a loved one to pass them the best piece. The storyteller's voice weakened, but no one wanted him to stop. A man with bones jutting through his skin whispered, Tell more. Tell us about the dish that smells the best. He smiled, his mouth dry, lips cracked wide. The best-smelling dish is the one I never got to taste. The room went silent. Everyone bowed their heads. No one dared breathe too loud. Outside, wind slipped through the cracks, howling, carrying the echo of a world they'd lost. In the flickering torchlight, their hollow faces reflected pain and longing etched deep into every wrinkle. Someone tried to swallow, but their throat was too dry. Another bit their lip until it bled, and in that thick air, the flavors of food that had never been theirs became real, so real that each of them believed if they just listened a little longer, they might actually taste the flavor of their own memory. that memory slowly being devoured by hunger, thread by thread, like a rope fraying between life and oblivion. An old prisoner wrote the names of dishes on the wall like protective charms. He sat slumped in the corner where the flickering torchlight still reached, holding a broken piece of charcoal left from the last fire. Every stroke of his hand trembled, slow but determined, as if each word he wrote was another breath stolen back from death. Bread, he wrote first, then stopped, staring at the word as if it were a treasure. Another prisoner came close, whispering, "What are you doing?" The old man didn't answer, just smiled, his cracked lips curving faintly. After the first word, he went on. Meat soup, grilled fish, white rice, fried shallots. Each word like a prayer echoing in everyone's mind. They watched him, their eyes filled with curiosity and awe, because in a world where nothing was left to believe in, that act felt like a religious rite. The old man spoke softly, his voice hoarse. "I write them to remember. If not, I'm afraid I'll forget the taste of the old world." He paused, looking up at the wall, the damp, rough wall now covered in jagged lines of black. Each dish, each memory, each dream of a family meal appeared through those streaks of charcoal. Some words blurred, some smeared by dripping water, but he didn't care. For him, just seeing the words dulled the hunger a little, as if his stomach were filled with memory. A younger prisoner sat beside him, staring, whispering, writing their names, like calling their spirits back. The old man nodded. "Yes. If I can remember them, it means I'm still human." His voice trembled but carried deep, filling the cramped space and leaving everyone silent. After a while, others began to come forward, borrowing charcoal, writing more. Ash cake, black bean sweet soup, smoked meat, plain porridge, sticky rice cake, corn liquor. Simple words, scrawled with shaking hands, became an ember glowing inside the dungeon. On that wall the dishes turned into symbols of humanity, the one thing they could still hold on to in a flood of hunger. An old prisoner watched and said quietly, "I used to write debt ledgers for my customers. Now I'm writing my debt to life itself." The writing prisoner looked up and smiled, a toothless but bright smile. He slowly drew a circle around the word rice, then touched it with his fingertip like one touches the face of God. The whole cell fell silent. The flickering torch cast the word's shadows onto the ceiling, making them seem alive, dancing. Someone laughed softly, weakly. "When I get out of here, I'll eat every single one." No one replied, but they all thought the same thing. Each person had their own dish to dream of, and that wall now held all their souls. When night came and the torch burned out, the wall still glowed with a strange light, not from fire but from memory. People began to run their hands over the words, stroking them as if they could feel warmth from the lost dishes. Some whispered the names, like chanting, white rice, vegetable soup, braised fish, sticky rice cake. Each name spoken slowed their hearts, closed a wound. Someone broke down, tears falling onto the cold stone floor, mixing with charcoal dust, spreading into black stains. Another prisoner murmured, "If I die here, bury me by this wall." No one answered, only a hand resting on his shoulder, light but warm. They no longer had the strength to comfort with words, but each small gesture was enough to make their chests ache. That wall full of words, in the place the world forgot, had become the only thing still holding the shape of memory. When there was no food left to eat, they ate with their minds. When there was nothing left to believe, they believed in those crooked words as if they were a door home. And in the heavy darkness, the dry scratch of charcoal on stone still whispered softly, steadily, like the breathing of souls not yet willing to disappear from the world. Tonight's dreams are filled with the sounds of tearing flesh and the smell of roasting meat. As darkness falls and the last breath of the torch fades away, the dungeon sinks into terrifying silence once more. But within that suffocating blackness, strange sounds begin to creep into each prisoner's mind, not real, but echoing from within their dreams, where the line between hunger and madness blurs like fog. One man lies curled up, mouth open, lips moving as if chewing, his hands clawing at the air, grasping nothing. The dry, grinding sound of his teeth echoes across the room. Another suddenly jolts awake, eyes wide, breathing fast. He sits still for a few seconds, then smiles a twisted, blissful smile, "Meat," he whispers, his voice trembling like someone in delirium. "I can smell roasted meat." His words make several others open their eyes. In the dark, their dull pupils all turn toward him, then toward the emptiness where they imagine the smell comes from. A younger man, so thin his bones show through his skin, whispers, "Where?" The first man inhales deeply, eyes half closed, lips trembling. "Right here, the smell of smoke, of fat. Don't you feel it?" Another bursts into laughter, laughing until tears stream down his face, his voice breaking. "You're mad! There's no fire here, no meat." But even he, after laughing, goes quiet, sniffing slightly, eyes distant. But there really is a smell. And then the whole torn-apart room falls silent. Each person begins breathing deeply, trying to find the scent their minds conjured. Smoke, burning fat, charred skin mingled with the essence of meat. It isn't real, yet in their heads it's vivid enough to touch. The storyteller from earlier, the old man who wrote food names on the wall, murmurs, "I once grilled meat over fire. When the fat dripped onto the coals and the smoke rose, I remember that hiss more clearly than any voice." His tone sinks, heavy with longing, and for a moment the air around them seems warmer. A man nearby starts to cry. "I remember too, grilled meat with lime leaves, golden fat dripping, dipped in salt and pepper." Each word cuts like a blade into their empty stomachs, making every belly twist as if being wrung dry. Someone can't bear it anymore. He bolts upright, flailing his arms, screaming, "Stop it! Don't say another word!" Yet he's the first to fall to the ground, clawing at the dirt, sniffing desperately like a starving beast hunting its prey. And then something strange happens. A faint wisp of smoke drifts through the air. It might be from a torch in the corridor, or maybe just a shared hallucination, but that smell of smoke makes the whole dungeon tremble. One by one, heads rise, eyes wide. "Do you smell it?" "Yes, I swear I do. It's meat, real meat." The whispers rise, trembling, frantic. An old man sobs, choking. Someone must be roasting for the guards. The fat's dripping down, the smoke's blowing in here. He tilts his head back, inhaling hard, as if trying to swallow the flavor of a world beyond these walls. Hunger drives them into madness. Another mutters, "If we can smell it, it must be close." He crawls slowly toward the bars, reaching out as if to grasp the smoke, but touches only cold air. Still, he doesn't stop, whispering, "Just a little more. I'll reach it soon." The man beside him watches, then imitates. Then a third, a fourth. Soon, the whole cell is filled with men on their knees, gasping, clawing, like stray dogs around a slaughterhouse. The air fills with panting, groans, and the scrape of fingernails on stone. In that chaos, you sit still, watching, and you see it. Real smoke. A thin line of it, curling through the iron bars, twisting like thread. Your nose burns, your heart races, because that smell, though faint, feels real. It brings back 1,000 forgotten meals, the warmth of fire, the taste of fat, the laughter around a table. And then you understand, even the faintest trace of smoke is enough to make these dying souls come alive again. A young prisoner near the door lifts his head, eyes blazing. "If they're really cooking out there, I'll find a way out," he says, his voice no longer hoarse but burning like fire. He grips the bars, pulls hard, then screams. The sound tears through the air, mingling with the growls of empty stomachs, creating a wild, guttural noise like a caged beast's roar. Outside, no one answers, only the wind howling through the corridor. But inside, the scent of roasted meat, whether real or imagined, lingers, haunting every soul, trapping them between two worlds, one of cold stone and one of fire. And on that edge, they no longer sleep, no longer dream. They only breathing in smoke, living on scent, dying slowly within the illusions they themselves have made. A prisoner collapses from exhaustion, and no one helps him. The sound of his body hitting the stone floor is heavy, dry, like a sack of sand falling. That sound echoes off every wall, reverberating in each person's head, but no one moves. He lies there, face down on the floor, still clutching his empty wooden bowl. No breath left, only his thin frame trembling weakly. A man sitting nearby stares at him, eyes brazen and hollow like stone. "He's fallen," he whispers. "He's fallen." No one answers. No one approaches. No one calls for help. Hunger has eaten away at pity, dried up compassion, leaving people only able to watch each other as if watching a piece of meat wither. Another man turns his head away, trying not to look. A moment later he looks back. That body hasn't moved. The torchlight reveals each rib, each strand of flesh under the pale grey skin. Someone swallows. The sound loud and distinct, then silence again. No one speaks, but something in the air shifts. An old man bows his head, mumbling a prayer, not for the fallen man but for himself. A younger one crawls closer, not out of sympathy but curiosity. He touches the man's wrist, cold. His hand slides up to the shoulder, then stops. "He's dead," he says softly, eyes fixed on the lifeless face. Someone lets out a dry laugh, short, broken, as if the life left in him was just enough to spit out a sound mocking fate. "One more gone," he says, voice fading. "One less mouth to feed." The words fall colder than the wind. Everyone is silent, no one protests. Here, death is no longer something to fear. It's part of the air, part of the meal, part of sleep, part of breath itself. One man glances at the fallen body, seeing his lips still crusted with dry porridge, and licks lightly, trying to find the salt left behind. Nothing, only dust. Another prisoner, skin yellow and swollen, asks softly, "Should we drag him to the corner?" But no one answers. No one wants to touch that corpse, fearing death will cling to them. And so he stays there, in the middle of the room, like a marker dividing the fragile life left from the darkness creeping closer. Time passes, no one knows how long. Some drift off, some sit motionless, some glance at the body as if guarding a wild animal. The torch burns low, the smell of burnt fat mingling with the smell of people, of sweat, and now the scent of skin growing cold. The body begins to change. No one says it, but everyone knows. The air thickens, grows heavier, and each breath taken is an effort not to think about what's happening. A young prisoner leans against the wall, staring at the dead man's hand. That hand is curled, green veins standing out, joints poking through like little sticks. He thinks of yesterday's bowl of porridge, of hunger clawing his stomach, and feels a pang of regret that maybe he should have fought harder for more. Across the room, someone begins to whisper, "If the guards don't take the body away, it will rot. We'll die too." "No," another replies, voice choked. "They don't care. They want us to die slowly." The words leave everyone silent. They know it's true. An old man who once had a son says softly, "I buried my family once, out there, in the snow. At least they lay in peace. But here..." He lifts his head, looking around with clouded eyes. Here, no one rests. Then he falls silent, head bowed. In the corner, the storyteller from before still sits, staring at the wall full of words. He picks up the charcoal, trembling, and writes another small line beneath the old dishes. Ash cake, grilled meat, white rice, and man. The charcoal line breaks, crumbling to the floor. No one asks him why he wrote it. They only watch, eyes empty, and in that moment the difference between eating and dying blurs. Each breath echoes, mixing with the drip of water from the ceiling, falling right into the dried blood where the fallen man lies. Each drop sounds like metal striking, slow, steady, like an unavoidable count. And though no one speaks again, they all understand tonight. The smell of the corpse will not just frighten them, it will make them think of something else, something more terrifying than death itself. The rumor of cannibalism spreads in the dark corner. It begins as a whisper, so faint it could have been the wind slipping through the cracks in the stone. But in the sealed air of the dungeon, where every sound can become a spark, it spreads fast, slithering through every breath, every glance. "Someone has done it," a hoarse, broken voice murmurs into the night. No one answers, but everyone hears. A man lifts his head, his dull eyes flickering with a pale light. "What did you say?" "I said, someone has eaten human flesh," the voice repeats, this time clearer, heavier, like a curse. Every gaze turns toward him. There is no outrage, no horror, only silence, wet, suffocating silence that reeks of hunger. "Where did you hear that?" another asks, voice trembling not from fear but from hope. "From the next cell," he replies, cracked lips curling faintly. "Someone died, and by morning the body was gone." The air thickens. Those sitting near the door glance at each other, none daring to breathe too loudly. A draught creeps through the bars, freezing cold, yet everyone feels heat burning in their chests. Someone lets out a rasping laugh. "You're mad! Who would do that?" "If you're this hungry?" Another interrupts, voice smaller. "Then anything's possible." That truth makes everyone bow their heads. No one dares look at one another, afraid of seeing in someone's eyes what they themselves cannot admit. An old man murmurs, his voice trembling. "Long ago I heard tales from the mountains. When snow buried the world, people ate their own to survive. I laughed once, called it sin. But now—" He trails off, his clouded eyes turning toward the corner where a corpse still lies, curled, cold, still. No one speaks, but every gaze follows his. The silence stretches endlessly. Then, as if one thought were enough to ignite them all, the same idea begins to form in every mind. The sound of rumbling stomachs fills the air, a cruel reminder that morality cannot fill an empty gut. Someone swallows hard, whispers, "If it's someone already dead." His voice falters, as if he himself cannot believe the words leaving his mouth. "If he's dead already, then it's no sin, right?" Another laughs, a dry, grinding sound like stones scraping together. "No sin? Eating people isn't sin?" But his laugh trembles, because in his mind he already smells the meat burning, the fat melting, the smoke rising. A young man claps his hands over his ears, screaming softly, "Stop it! Don't say it!" But the more he tries not to hear, the more he does the breath, the dry gulps, the clicking of teeth, all merging into a grotesque symphony of hunger, gnawing at empty souls. "If we don't eat, we'll die anyway," someone says. The words are thin as a blade, but sharp enough to slice through the silence. The torchlight flickers across the wall, casting distorted, twitching shadows like creatures without names. "Are you sure the others really did it?" someone asks quietly. He nods, eyes gleaming. "I heard bones crack." The sound, small, sharp, echoes inside every skull, making flesh crawl. An old man sighs. "If I die, take what you need. Just don't forget to say my name first." No one answers, because no one can promise that. In the darkness, one trembling hand reaches out, and another grasps it not out of kinship, but out of fear. Fear that tonight, one might be the chosen, or the one who must choose. Footsteps echo down the hallway, the guard on patrol, his boots striking a steady, cold rhythm. When the sound fades, only heartbeats remain, the air thick with breath and hunger that no longer waits for dawn. Someone whispers, "If he really did eat, he must have lived longer than us." The words lift every head. A twisted, dark spark of hope glints in their eyes. They no longer see each other as fellow prisoners. In each gaze now lives the image of weak flesh of a body, not a man. No one dares to speak, but all understand tonight. When someone sleeps too deeply, when breath grows faint, when hands fall limp, someone may try. Not out of evil, not out of cruelty, but because life itself is screaming, and the sound of an empty stomach is louder than conscience. And in the corner, beneath the cold moss, the old man's charcoal words, white rice, vegetable soup, braised fish, have almost faded, leaving only one word behind. Man. Someone looked at the corpse as a source of meat. The weak torchlight flickered across his face, his hollow eyes glowing with that strange brightness, the kind only starving beasts have when they spot prey. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, staring at the stiffened body in the center of the room. The dead man's skin had turned ashen grey, lips shriveled, fingers curled tight as if frozen by the winter wind. But to a man whose stomach had twisted itself into knots, all he saw was no longer a corpse. It was something that could keep him alive one more day. His gaze traced the shrinking flesh, the jutting bones, as if calculating. A faint breath sounded behind him. Another prisoner was watching, thinking the same thing. Their eyes met in silence. No words, yet both understood. A fragile boundary thinner than a strand of hair was being pushed toward its edge. In the corner, the old storyteller sat motionless, head resting on his knees, asleep or unconscious, no one could tell. Rats scurried by, burrowing into the dead man's torn clothes, gnawing on the scraps before vanishing again. The tiny chewing noises, crisp and sharp, felt like needles stabbing into the skull. The man staring at the corpse trembled, fists clenching so hard that blood seeped from his palms. He couldn't look away. The smell of the dead began to spread, the sweet, metallic, damp odor of decay, the kind that once made him gag, but now made his mouth dry, his tongue stick to the roof of his mouth. He swallowed. The sound echoed through the silent cell. Someone nearby flinched, turned, eyes sharp and wary. "What are you thinking?" The man rasped, voice dry as sand. The other didn't answer, just shook his head and turned away. But the corner of his mouth trembled. No words were needed. They both knew. A younger prisoner, lying near the door, lifted his head and said, voice cracking, Don't do it. He's a man, like us." The words fell cold, unanswered. Because everyone knew that like us meant nothing anymore. He was dead, they were alive, and that line alone changed everything. The man stood, slowly moving toward the body. Each step made the chains at his ankles clink softly against the stone, cold and hollow. He knelt, staring closely at the dead man's face. The eyes were still open, glassy, staring at the ceiling, as if he hadn't yet realized he was gone. The living man's hand trembled as he reached out, touching the shoulder. The flesh was cold, stiff, but soft beneath the muscle. He jerked back, breathing hard, sweat running down his back. "No," he whispered to himself. "No." But the hunger inside roared louder, like an animal long caged. He looked around, no one spoke, no one stopped him. A few pairs of eyes watched quietly, patiently, as if waiting to see what he would do next. The torchlight danced, lighting their faces gaunt, hollow, eyes gleaming like predators. From across the cell, someone said in a voice so cold it cut the air, "If you don't dare, someone else will." The words were a knife, slicing through the last thread of conscience. He bent down, fingers tracing the collar, then pausing. He shut his eyes, took a deep breath. The stench flooded his head, making him cough. But even through the choking, his stomach clenched harder. 1 second. 2. Then he opened his eyes. The look in them was no longer human. He bit his lip until it bled, leaned forward, hand touching the dead man's arm. "Forgive me," he whispered, not knowing if he was speaking to the corpse, or to some god that had long abandoned this place. A small sound followed the faint scrape of a nail against dry skin. Someone closed their eyes, unable to watch. But another laughed, a cracked, bitter sound. "We've been dead for a long time. He's just eating what's left." The words broke something. A few others began to stir, their hesitant gazes turning to hunger, then to raw craving. No one spoke again. The clinking of chains filled the silence, mingled with heavy breaths, and the thick, human stench. Drops of water dripped from the ceiling, falling onto the dried blood beside the corpse, spreading like something alive. And in that suffocating stillness, as the torch burned down to a dim red glow, the starving man's eyes gleamed once more, not with fear, but with the cold acceptance of one who has learned to live alongside darkness, and is ready to face the thing he once swore he'd never become. Some prisoners would rather die than touch a corpse. When darkness covers the dungeon, when the clinking of chains and the moaning wind blend into a funeral dirge, those who still cling to some fragment of consciousness begin to draw away, pressing their backs to the walls as if to escape an invisible thing everyone knows is happening at the center of the room. The last torch has died, leaving only the smell of scorched smoke and the cold creeping in like the caress of death's hand. An old man sinks to his knees, his hands trembling as they clutch a tiny wooden cross he's hidden for so long, whispering a prayer. "Forgive us. Save our souls from the sin of hunger." But his voice is lost in the heavy breathing of the others. In the opposite corner, several shadows quietly kneel around the stiff body. They don't speak, don't cry, don't scream. They only bow their heads, moving in small, slow, secret motions that terrify. The soft cracking of joints, the faint tearing of cloth, sounds like rats at work. The old man squeezes his eyes shut, trying not to hear, but his ears register everything, the breaths, the movements, every sound sharp and clear. He begins to weep, tears falling onto his wrinkled hands. "No, not human," he whispers. "Don't do it." A young prisoner sitting beside him trembles, saying, "I'd rather die than eat my friend's corpse." His voice is firm, but his eyes wander, dull, as if even he no longer believes his own words. Hunger has reduced them to shells kept alive only by will. Another man, gaunt, hollow-faced, looks at him and sighs. "You say that, but one more night with an empty stomach, will you still say it?" The question falls like a blade. He doesn't answer. He just bows his head, clutching his belly, eyes shut tight. Another old man, voice shaking, speaks as if pleading, "Do what you must. Just don't let me see." He turns his face away, his small shoulders curling in, trembling. A woman, perhaps once a servant in some noble house, speaks softly, her voice choked. "If this is the way to live, then I don't want to live." After speaking, she quietly draws a small shard of metal from her wrist, hidden for years, intending to cut her own skin not to eat, but to punish herself for even thinking such a sin. Her hand trembles, but the person beside her stops her. "Don't. At least wait until morning." The words hold no hope, only a meaningless delay, like holding a candle a few seconds longer before it burns out. In this room, the line between life and death is so thin a breath could erase it. Some whisper prayers, some stay silent, some stare at the dark corner where the shadows bend over the body. The sound of teeth clicking, of breath quickening, blends like a poisonous wind. The old man suddenly shouts, "Stop! Stop it!" But no one listens. He lunges toward them, trying to pull one kneeling figure back, but only manages to catch the man's eyes, the eyes no longer human. They are the eyes of an animal about to tear flesh. He stumbles back, collapsing onto the cold stone, and in that instant, he understands. The choice between life and death is no longer morality, but instinct. He curls up, trembling, crying without sound. Beside him, the woman still stares into emptiness, her eyes dry, her voice like a passing breeze. Perhaps God has already left this place. Another laughs harshly. If God were real, he'd have given us food. The laugh is brief, swallowed by the wind, and the muffled sounds still going on at the center of the room. The stench grows stronger, heavy and metallic, but inside it lingers something that makes the starving shiver. A young man screams, covering his ears, Don't let me hear it anymore." He bangs his head against the wall, blood running down, then faints. The others stay silent, each facing hunger in their own way. Some praying, some despairing, some pressing their foreheads to the stone, some staring at the ceiling where droplets still fall like the ticking clock of fate. In the far corner, the old storyteller trembles, pulling out his charcoal to write one last line on the wall, his hand smeared with blood and tears. Some have forgotten who they are, some still remember, and that is what hurts more than death itself. Then he lays the charcoal down, staring at his shadow etched against the stone, small, trembling, but still human, in a world where hunger has gnawed humanity to the bone. The cold makes food even scarcer, bread hard as stone. The night stretches endlessly, the wind howling through the cracks in the walls like the wails of trapped souls. In the darkness, bony hands rummage through every corner, searching for anything that can be shoved into a mouth. Bread, once a symbol of life, has now become a pale yellow rock, so dry no blade can cut it. An old man uses all his strength, slamming it against the stone floor, the sound echoing cold and hollow like a hammer on a coffin. The bread shatters, scattering sharp fragments like broken bricks. He picks up a piece, tries to bite. A tooth cracks with a small snap, blood seeping from his gums. But he still swallows, forcing it down as if in that moment his own blood is a seasoning to help the dry lump slide down his throat. Beside him another laughs hoarsely. "Is this bread made of stone?" No one answers, only the clattering of teeth. A younger, gaunt man lifts a piece, gently blowing the mouldy dust off its surface, then takes a bite. Immediately, he grimaces, the fragment flying from his mouth to the floor. "Mold!" he hisses through his teeth. like eating mushrooms off the wall. But then he bends down, picks up the piece again, blows one more time, and this time he chews, slowly, carefully. Each movement of his jaw is pain, but he keeps chewing because he cannot lose even a speck of something that can be called food. In the corner, a woman watches him, silently offering the tiny scrap of bread still in her hand. "Take it," she says softly. "I can't swallow it." He looks at her, eyes red, trembling as he takes it, then speaks in a broken voice. "I'll pay you back." She smiles, a gentle smile like a mother's. "If you're still alive." The words are light as wind, but they silence the room. No one dares look at each other. They all understand that each crumb, each fragment, is the boundary between survival and vanishing. Another prisoner, bigger, snatches the piece from the young man's hand, shoving it into his mouth, chewing voraciously. The younger lunges, striking weakly, only knocking over the torch, its flame sputtering out, smoke rising. In the darkness, the sounds of struggle erupt, shoving, hoarse, shouting, sobs caught in throats. When the light is rekindled, only a streak of blood remains on the floor, and a crumb of bread crushed underfoot. They look at each other, not speaking, not accusing, because no one has the strength to tell right from wrong. An old man quietly picks up the crumb, breaks it in half, and gives it to the one sitting beside him. No thanks are spoken. They simply put it into their mouths. The hard, bitter, salty taste of blood mixed with the sour of mold makes everyone shudder. But at least they still feel themselves swallowing, still feel themselves existing. Someone lets out a weak laugh. Bread, once soft as clouds, now turned to stone. Another replies, voice dry. Clouds can dissolve, stone cannot. The dungeon erupts into a few strangled chuckles, but in those sounds lies something deep, something real, like the sigh of souls who've stopped expecting. One prisoner bends down, picking up the tiniest dust of bread from the floor, gathering it in his palm, licking it. "At least," he says, "it still smells of flour." Another beside him begins to cry, not from emotion, but because his throat is so dry, tears are the only thing left to flow. In the corner, the old storyteller again takes his charcoal, writing on the wall, bread cold, hard, and indifferent, like the world outside. His hand trembles, the words crooked, but his eyes shine a little brighter. Perhaps only while writing does he feel alive. A young prisoner steps closer, looking at the words, smiling faintly. The world outside still has bread to harden. Here, we only have stone. The words make the old man lift his head, eyes glistening. "But at least you can still say that," he answers. "That means you're not dead yet." They look at each other, crooked smiles spreading across grey faces. Outside, the wind howls as if tearing the prison apart, carrying the scent of snow and metal. A few small snowflakes slip through the bars, falling, melting onto the last scraps of bread, softening them a little. Someone quickly picks one up, brings it to his mouth, bites. Softer, truly. He laughs, a hoarse, bitter laugh. "Snow makes the bread better," he says. And so the others begin catching snow too, placing it on the dry crumbs, waiting for it to melt, then sharing. No one says anything more, only the quiet, slow sound of chewing, and in that moment the cold and the hunger blend together, making the boundary between life and death so thin it feels like a single breath could erase it. Guards mocked them, throwing leftover bones inside, and chaos broke out. That morning, when pale grey light slipped through the cracks in the door, the prisoners were sitting motionless, like shadows without breath. Hunger had surpassed all limits of endurance. It was no longer a feeling in the stomach, but an echo in their heads, urging, tormenting, like a dark melody on repeat. Then, from the hallway, footsteps echoed slow, heavy, dripping with arrogance. A guard appeared, carrying a dark leather sack swinging lazily at his side. He stopped at the bars, peered inside, and sneered. "Dogs," he said, dragging out the word as if savouring it. "Hungry?" No one answered, only weak breaths filled the air. He laughed louder, opened the bag, and pulled out a yellowed bone, streaked with rotten meat. "Here," he said, "eat." Then he hurled it inside. The bone hit the floor with a cold, dry thud, rolled once, and stopped in the center of the room. All eyes locked on it instantly. No longer the eyes of humans, but of beasts starved too long. For a heartbeat, no one dared move. But then, a single ragged breath broke the stillness, and the room exploded. Gaunt bodies lunged at one another, limbs intertwining, the sounds of impact, moans and screams crashing together in chaos. One man was knocked down, his head cracking against stone, blood spilling. Another stepped on his back without looking back. The bone was being yanked from four sides, skeletal hands like claws clawing for the last scrap. Someone pulled hard, the bone snapping in two, fragments scattering into a corner. He clutched his piece, biting deep, gnawing wildly. The sound of teeth on bone was horrifying, dry like stone grinding. The stench of rot filled the air, but no one cared. Another crawled to grab a splinter, licking, biting, even inhaling from the break as if there was still fat inside. "Give it back!" A shout, then a punch, a kick. Nails scratched, teeth bit, everything blending together. The guard stood outside, chuckling darkly, his laugh echoing down the hall like a demon's. "Look," he said to the comrade behind him, "they're worse than animals." He tossed in another bone, this one a leg, black and caked with mud. Another frenzy erupted. They hit, kicked, clawed, tore. A man as thin as a husk was flung into the wall, his head striking stone knocked out cold. Another lunged, snatching a bone from his rival's hands, but before he could bring it to his mouth, an elbow smashed his face. Blood splattered, falling to the floor, mingling with dirty water. Another licked it up, thinking it was broth. No words left, only growls. The cries were like beasts cornered. Dim light fell on blood and dust-streaked faces, wild eyes no longer distinguishing friend from foe. An old man tried to crawl away, trembling, covering his head, mumbling, "Stop, stop," but no one heard. A young woman was knocked down, still clutching a tiny finger-sized shard of bone, the only thing she had managed to claim. A large man grabbed it, but she bit his hand, teeth sinking in until blood burst out. He screamed, kicked her down, snatching the bone back. She lay still, gasping, then began to laugh, a hoarse, twisted sound. "Eat," she said. "Eat, and see if it fills you." He didn't answer, just squatted, tearing at the bone like a dog. Around them, no one cared. When the last bone had been gnawed white, the room fell silent. Only panting, groans, and the smell of blood remained. One man sat down, holding his head in his hands, whispering, "What have we become?" But no one answered. Another muttered softly, "I just want to live. I just want to live." Outside the bars, the guard still stood, leaning against the wall, his eyes cold as steel. He flicked his wrist, tossed in another tiny bone, then turned away, his voice trailing in a cruel laugh. "Tomorrow, I'll bring more. Teach you dogs gratitude." The iron door slammed shut, the sound ringing like a hammer of fate, ending the grotesque feast of those who once were human. Inside the room, a few still knelt, picking up the tiniest crumbs left on the floor, shoving them into their mouths, eyes dull, lips trembling, as if they were eating their own pride to keep what little breath remained inside their exhausted bodies. The weak were trampled for an empty bone. After the chaotic struggle, the stone floor of the cell was smeared with blood, filthy water, and dull white fragments splintered from a bone gnawed to its core. Amid that wreckage, a small, frail prisoner still clutched the remaining piece of bone in his hands. Nothing left but a dry, cracked shell. He didn't eat it. He just held it, his eyes distant, as if that shard were the last treasure of his life. His belly was sunken, skin stuck to bone, hands trembling, but he wouldn't let go. The others stared, their gazes a mixture of contempt and hunger. A hulking man approached, lumbering like a chained bear. "Give it here," he said, voice rasping like grinding steel. The small one shook his head, clutching tighter. The big man grinned, a cruel, crooked grin, and kicked hard. The blow sent the smaller man crashing down, his head hitting stone with a dry, hollow thud. The brute bent down, snatched the bone. "Nothing left to chew," he said, "but I like the feeling of biting." And then he did biting down again and again in a savage ritual, as if proving he was still stronger, still alive, still the survivor. The small man lay there, face streaked with blood, his lips trembling. You took the hollow one. For what? His voice faded, weak as the dying flicker of a flame. The big man didn't answer. He just chewed, teeth grinding against the empty bone, a sound that made the whole dungeon flinch. That noise echoed through the darkness, mingling with the heavy breathing of those watching. A younger prisoner bowed his head and murmured. He only wanted to keep it, to remember what it felt like to eat. His words made several turn away, not out of pity, but out of shame. Shame because they too had wanted that same useless bone. The small man lay still, eyes wide open, staring at the moss-covered ceiling. He breathed fast, fingers scraping the floor as if searching for something invisible. Hunger had twisted him into something between the living and the dead. The bone, worthless, hollow, had become a symbol of power, of the right to crush another for one more breath. The brute finished chewing, spat the rest onto the floor, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and looked around, his gaze defiant. Anyone else want to try? No one answered. They all bowed their heads, not from fear, but from exhaustion, weakness, and hunger too deep for hatred. An old man sitting against the wall muttered, "Once, people killed for gold. Now, it's for a hollow bone." He let out a rough, broken laugh that turned into a cough, choking midway. "We've gone back to the beginning." His words sank into silence. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the clang of metal chains swaying on the wall. A few prisoners began scraping the floor, gathering the tiniest bone dust left behind, putting it into their mouths, crunching it between their teeth. Every sound was a blade cutting through the minds of those who still felt shame. A woman watched and whispered, "All that's left are shells." The old storyteller slowly opened his eyes and looked around. He no longer wrote on the wall, he had no strength left. Instead, he watched them, his gaze heavy with the weight of crushed humanity. "An empty bone," he murmured. "But what's inside?" No one answered. They knew he wasn't talking about marrow. He was asking about the human heart, also drained, dried, hollow, like that bone lying there. A young prisoner, eyes red and swollen, whispered, "If I had another, I'd do the same." The old man nodded, without judgment. "Hunger makes us forget who we are," he said softly. "But when we're full again, we'll remember, and then we'll have to live with what we've done." The room went silent. No groans, no chewing, just slow, heavy breathing, and the sound of hearts beating like funeral drums. Outside the bars, a guard returned, torchlight gleaming on his sneering face. He tapped his metal rod against the bars, the clang ringing out like a warped church bell. "Full now, dogs?" he hissed, his voice slithering like a serpent. No one answered. They didn't even hear him. Because now, in that frozen room, each of them was lost inside their own hunger. A hunger not just of the stomach, but of the soul, where humanity had eroded, leaving behind something dry, hollow, and broken, like the very bone they'd fought to the end for. From the bowl of gruel, the sound of slurping became the most terrifying sound. At first, it was just a normal sound, small, wet, echoing among the heavy breaths of the exhausted. But then, in that thick air, it slowly turned into something haunting. Every time the slurping rose, people turned their heads, their eyes mixed with envy, anger, and despair. A man who had just received his portion of thin gruel in a cracked wooden bowl bent down, hands trembling. He stared at the cloudy water inside, a few swollen grains floating alone, then took a deep breath and began to slurp. The srup, srup dragged on, echoing off the cold stone walls. That sound, among dozens of empty stomachs, was like a trumpet call to madness. A man nearby clenched his teeth, eyes shut, but his ears still caught each slurp, clear as day. He tried to imagine it as wind, as dripping water, but the more he tried, the louder it grew, sharper, stabbing deeper into his eardrums. "He's slurping too long," someone whispered. Then another voice rose, choked. "He's holding back, not finishing." And just like that, the air shifted, all eyes fixed on the man eating. He realized, looked up, lips wet, hand frozen. The room went dead silent. Even breathing stopped. In that moment, He knew every pair of eyes was looking not at him, but at his bowl. Another man stepped closer, slowly, voice hoarse. "Just give me a sip." He shook his head, covering the bowl, trembling. The other bent down, eyes turning red, voice louder. "Just a sip. I won't take it." The words sounded like begging, but hidden inside was the growl of a cornered animal. That hand suddenly lashed out, grabbing the bowl. Liquid spilled, splashing onto the stone floor, tiny streaks glinting under torchlight. Both fell. The bowl rolled away, wood clattering against the wall. A small chaos erupted, people crowding, crawling, trying to scoop up every drop of gruel left. One man lay face down, licking the floor where the liquid had run. Another found a single grain of barley, lifted it to his mouth, swallowed without chewing. The slurping now was no longer one man's, but dozens, hundreds of sounds, frantic, dry, hurried like beasts licking blood. An old man in the corner watched, eyes sunken, slowly shaking his head. "Such thin gruel, yet even this becomes a sin," he murmured. A young man beside him burst into tears. "It's not sin, it's instinct." His voice trembled, breaking, and in those tears were both regret and hunger. Across the room, the guard heard the noise, chuckled, muttering, "Just a bit of dirty water and they'll kill each other. Amazing." He walked away, leaving the iron door ajar. Inside, no one spoke again. Those who had managed to seize a little of the gruel huddled against the wall, heads down, finishing the cold, bland liquid. The syrup rose softly, but each time it sounded the whole cell froze. People began fearing even the sound of eating. One man even held his breath as he drank, trying not to make a sound, afraid of stares, of envy, of theft. Silence became an invisible law. The bowl of gruel was no longer food, but a sacred object. Anyone who touched it, moved it, became the center of inhuman eyes. The old storyteller lifted his hand to the wall, writing a few more words. The sound of slurping, the sound of guilt and life. His hand shook, but he wrote anyway. Each stroke of charcoal was a cut into the soul. "Once," he whispered, "slurping was the sound of plenty. Now, it's the sound of someone dying of hunger." No one answered. A man nearby, his eyes dull, gave a weak laugh. "At least there's still a sound to hear." That smile was crooked, decayed, but in the room heavy with the stench of people and blood, it was the only proof that someone still knew they were alive. After a while, the wind whistled through the door crack again, extinguishing the last torch. In the darkness, the sound of slurping rose once more. No one knew if it was real or just in their heads. That sound creeping through weary breaths like a reminder that, in this hell, life still existed, but wore the shape of horror. The prisoners gradually stopped talking, leaving only hungry eyes. The days bled into one another like feverish dreams without sunrise. Hunger was no longer a feeling, it had become part of their bodies. It lived in their breath, in every heartbeat, in the crack of their bones each time they moved. No one spoke anymore. Words had lost their meaning. They had once told stories of food, prayed, begged, fought, killed one another, and now there was nothing left to say. Only the gaze remained, the last thing untouched by time and starvation. Their eyes, under the weak flicker of firelight, glowed like lost fragments of light. They looked at each other, not to communicate, but as if counting the remaining breaths. At every sound, dozens of eyes turned at once, swift as hunting beasts. A crumb of bread, a shifting shadow, a heavy breath, any of it could tighten the air in the cell like a string about to snap. Some sat slumped against the wall, hollow-eyed, mouths half open but silent. The ones beside them, too. Between them was a space thick and heavy, silent enough that one could hear only the growl of empty stomachs and the steady drip of water falling from the ceiling. Each drop sounded like a clock tick, slow, cold, and strange. It was the only proof that time still moved. An old man tried to speak, lips trembling, but no sound came out. He smiled, toothless, and lifted a shaking finger to his mouth, as if to say, "No need any more." The young man opposite him, empty-eyed, nodded. They looked at each other, not smiling, not crying, just looking. Another man lay in the corner, body thin as a stick, eyes half open, staring at the ceiling as if following something invisible. He didn't blink, didn't move, and no one knew if he was still breathing. No one cared enough to check. Only when a rat scurried across the floor did those eyes come alive again, flaring like embers caught in the wind. Someone tried to reach out, but couldn't. The small movement made him topple over, the chain around his ankle scraping the stone with a faint clang. Then silence. All eyes turned toward the sound. The gaze was no longer about concern. It was instinct, looking to see what was still edible, what was already dead. The old storyteller sat quietly, head resting against the wall. He still had a small piece of charcoal, but he no longer wrote. There was nothing left to write. All the words before had said everything. Hunger, death, human, bone, gruel, silence. Now only eyes remained. He looked around and realized they were looking back. Dozens of eyes, large, small, old, young, all fixed on him. He swallowed, throat dry and raw. "I have nothing," he whispered, as if to explain. But they kept staring. One gaze from across the room, pupils wide, black as pits, held him frozen. There was no emotion in it, no good or evil, only absolute emptiness. It made his spine go cold, then it slowly turned away, as if confirming he was useless, nothing left to take. Near the door, a woman coughed softly, eyes half open. Her breath was so faint it made no sound, but her eyes still moved, following the light slipping through the bars. Maybe she was imagining the sky, or the glow of a kitchen lamp from a life long gone. No one knew. A young man, perhaps in his 20s, sat with his hands on his knees, staring into nothing. He didn't move, didn't speak, only blinked occasionally, and each blink dimmed the light in his eyes a little more, like a flame dying out. Hunger had robbed them even of breath. The sound of their breathing merged into a faint whisper, like wind brushing through dead trees. One man sat in the center of the room, eyes half closed, lips moving slightly, maybe talking to himself. "I once saw the sky," he murmured. "It was so blue." No one heard, no one answered. The others kept staring into emptiness, their eyes like fading sparks scattered across a cooling world. Then, after a while, he went silent, head drooping. No one knew if he slept or stopped breathing. In that room, silence was no longer frightening. It had become the only thing familiar. The dying torchlight flickered on the walls, reflecting in their eyes dozens of small lights, blinking, fading, like creatures trapped in the shell of night. And among those glimmers, only one thing still truly lived: hunger. It crawled slowly through each of them, silently devouring what was left of their souls, turning every word meaningless, leaving only eyes bare, cold, yet still holding that faint, desperate glimmer of humanity, forgotten in a world made of nothing but breath and darkness. A prisoner vaguely remembered a summer festival, a table full of food. In a half-dream, half-waking state, as the cold seeped deep into his bones, he found himself standing in the light, not the sickly torchlight of the dungeon, but the bright golden sunlight spreading across a field. Cicadas sang loudly, the wind rustled over tiled roofs, and the scent from someone's kitchen floated in the air, so sweet he could almost hear the fat sizzling in the pan. He lifted his head and saw before him a long table draped in white cloth, covered with bread, meat, wine, and fresh fruit. Everyone around him wore clean clothes, their faces bright, smiling, glasses clinking in cheerful rhythm. At the head of the table, his mother ladled him a bowl of hot soup, steam rising thick and fragrant, the smell of scallions blending with meat, making his stomach growl even in his dream. "Eat," she said, her voice warm. "Eat, my son, you've grown too thin." He reached out, took the bowl, the heat spreading through his hands, almost making him cry with happiness. When the first spoonful touched his lips, the light saltiness and tender sweetness melted together, dissolving on his tongue. He smiled, tears streaming down his face. That warmth, that softness, that reality. It was nothing like the cold water he had been forced to swallow for days. The laughter and chatter around him rose like a summer song. Someone poured wine, someone passed him fish, someone clapped his shoulder, saying, "Drink. Today, there's nothing to fear." He laughed loudly, took a gulp, The burning rush down his throat made him cough. His mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder again. "It's all right. There's plenty more." He looked around and saw platters of roasted meat piled high like mountains, fat dripping, sizzling on the plates. He could smell lime leaves, grilled fish, fried garlic, each aroma blending into a symphony that intoxicated him. Suddenly, the sounds began to warp. The laughter faded. The cicadas went silent. The light dimmed. His mother stood before him, her smile still there, but her face began to blur. "Eat," she repeated, her voice distant. "Eat, before it gets cold." He looked down. The soup was now cold as ice. He touched it, the water freezing under his fingers. He looked back at the table, but no one was there. The wind blew, whipping the white cloth, and all the food was gone, leaving only empty plates, cold and damp. Panic seized him. He stood, ran around, calling, "Mother! Mother!" But the only answer was the wind. Then slowly, the bright scene collapsed, giving way to the damp darkness. The scent of roasted meat vanished, replaced by the stench of flesh, blood, and rusted iron. He opened his eyes and saw he was still in the dungeon. His mouth was open, not to laugh, but to breathe in weak gasps. In his hand, he still clutched something, a mouldy crumb of bread from yesterday, hard as stone. He stared at it, the laughter and scent of food still echoing faintly in his mind, as if they lingered in the air. Someone beside him looked over and asked softly, "Were you smiling?" He didn't answer, just nodded faintly, tears running down his face. "I dreamed," he whispered. "I was eating." The other man gave a sad smile. "In dreams, anything is possible." Then he turned away, eyes blank. But the one who had just awakened couldn't stop thinking about it. The more he thought, the stronger the hunger became, more vivid, more real. He shut his eyes tight, trying to return to that dream, to hear his mother's voice again, to smell the roasted meat again. But there was nothing, only thick, suffocating darkness. Another man whispered, "You're lucky to still remember what food smells like in dreams." He laughed weakly, a twisted sound. "I wish I didn't." Because that memory of flavor, even as an illusion, had become torture. His throat burned, his stomach twisted, and the cold air felt like knives cutting into his gut. He clutched his belly, trembling, muttering, "There's soup, there's fish, there's wine." The old man in the corner heard him, closed his eyes, his voice quivering. "Once, I dreamed of bread. I could smell the crust burning golden." No one answered. They just listened quietly. No one blamed him, no one laughed, because in this dungeon, dreams were the only thing left that could make a man tremble as if he were warm again. He lay on his side, breathing shallowly, his gaze drifting. In his mind, the feast went on, laughter echoing faintly, the smell of roasted meat still lingering, as if the dream had not completely left, but was hiding behind the darkness, waiting for a moment to rise again to carry him through the hunger, with visions more beautiful and more cruel than any truth still left in this place. Someone lit a splinter of wood, pretending to reheat a bowl of cold porridge. In the cold, so sharp it turned breath into mist, someone fumbled in the corner and pulled out a tiny piece of damp, mouldy wood, probably once part of an old crate. He looked around, as if afraid it would be stolen, then quietly picked up 2 small stones and struck them together. The faint crackling echoed, weak as a dying heartbeat. The others lifted their heads, their eyes slow but glimmering with a brief spark, not because of the fire, but because of memory. He kept striking, again and again, until the spark caught, and a thin line of smoke rose. A flame, no bigger than a needle's head, danced between his trembling hands. "Just warming the porridge," he said. But there was nothing left in the bowl except a thin layer of cold water at the bottom. Still, he held it close to the flame, as if the warmth might bring the food back to life. The room fell silent. Everyone watched, no one laughed. The tiny flame reflected in their eyes, flickering and trembling like hope or an illusion. Someone whispered, "The smoke smells like our kitchen back home." Another replied in a faint breath, "Home? Did we ever have a kitchen?" That question made a few people give short, breathless laughs, laughs with no sound. The man kept protecting the little fire, cupping it with his hands as it wavered and flared. He stared into the bowl, then blew gently. "Got to stir it, or it'll burn," he said softly, almost to himself. Those nearby watched him, their eyes no longer distinguishing real from imagined. He stirred with one finger, slow and careful, absurdly precise, but no one laughed. They only watched, because in that damp, human-scented cell, the sight made them believe they could almost smell fat, onions, fresh rice. One person closed their eyes, inhaled deeply, and truly believed they smelled hot porridge. The wind blew, the flame flickered, painting soft warmth across his hollow face. Sweat glistened on his forehead, or maybe just the condensation of his breath. He smiled faintly, a weary but gentle smile. "Almost ready," he murmured. The woman in the corner asked, "Is there enough for two?" He looked at her, hesitated, then nodded. "Of course. There's enough for everyone." Another scoffed. "For all of us?" He raised his head, the firelight glinting in his eyes. "If we believe, there will be." The room went quiet. Faith, 2 words no one had dared to speak in this place for a long time. He lifted the bowl, brought it to his lips, and blew softly as if afraid of burning himself. There was nothing inside, yet he still sipped, closed his eyes, and smiled. "It's hot," he said. Someone else, unable to bear it, crawled closer, begging, "Give me a sip, just one sip." He handed over the bowl without hesitation. The other man took it reverently, raised it to his lips, and breathed in. Tears fell not because of pain, but because in his mind, warmth spread through him, making him tremble. "It tastes like fat," he whispered, "and onions too." The others looked at one another, then slowly gathered closer, circling around the tiny flame. No one spoke. They just stared at that fire, small as a firefly, flickering faintly. Someone began to laugh, a thin, cracked laugh, and another joined in. The sound was broken, strangled, but painfully real. Wind swept through the iron bars, carrying fine snowflakes inside. They fell, melted on the warm ground, rising as soft wisps of steam. The scene was strangely beautiful, like humanity returning for one brief moment in the ashes of despair. The old storyteller said softly, "If you believe the porridge is hot, then it will be hot." Someone chuckled, shaking his head. "You've gone mad, old man." "Maybe," the old man replied, "but madness is kinder than hunger." No one argued. Each person, silently, leaned closer to the fading flame, extending their thin hands to feel what little warmth remained. After a while, the splinter burned out. The embers dimmed, leaving only a faint curl of smoke, yet no one moved. They stayed seated around the empty space where the fire had been, their eyes fixed on the empty bowl, imagining it still steaming, still fragrant, still warm. In the silence, a drop of water fell from the ceiling, landing in someone's palm. He smiled faintly, closing his hand around it, as if trying to hold on to the last bit of warmth left in a world that no longer had room for dreams or heat. The warmth lingered like a ritual, then vanished. After the little flame went out, darkness rushed back in, swallowing the room like a patient beast. Yet, for that brief moment, the faint warmth that remained still clung to their hands, keeping them still, afraid that even a blink might shatter the illusion. The man who had lit the fire still held the empty bowl of porridge, his lips moving as if reciting a prayer. The others bowed their heads, hands placed before their chests, silent. No one agreed to it, but they all did the same thing. They sat in a circle, heads bowed, as if performing some solemn ceremony no one dared name. Someone inhaled deeply, slowly, as if trying to trap the scent of smoke in their lungs. Someone else raised a trembling hand to their lips, murmuring a few words no one knew if it was a prayer or just an old habit of the once living. An old prisoner clasped his hands together, eyes closed, and whispered, "The flame lived briefly, but at least it let us see each other's faces once more." The words made a few lift their heads. Their faces were still gaunt, but their eyes softened a little, as if bathed in memory. A younger man sitting across smiled faintly. "You sound like a priest." "I used to light candles in a church," the old man replied. "Back then, I never knew how precious fire was." Silence followed. Wind slid through the cracks in the door, lifting bits of ash into the air, tiny red flecks like dying fireflies. A woman held out her hand, catching one, and whispered, "Look, it's like gold dust, isn't it?" No one laughed, but no one denied her either. In a world where even bones were treasures, a speck of ash could be a miracle. Another man, his voice rough and dry, murmured, "I once saw a lantern ceremony in a palace. They stood in a circle, just like this." The old man nodded. "Yes, but they had wine, meat, light. We have only smoke and breath." His tone wasn't bitter, just truthful, and maybe that was why everyone lowered their heads. The old storyteller in the corner suddenly reached out and drew a circle on the floor with his finger, tracing it with ash. "This is the fire," he said slowly, "and we are its keepers, the guardians of the last warmth left in humankind." No one answered, but all eyes turned toward the circle. After a while, a young man clasped his hands and whispered, "Give us fire once more." The old man looked at him, his eyes kind but weary. "Do you think I can summon fire?" "No," the young one said softly, "but maybe we can summon the feeling of it." Then he closed his eyes. The others followed. No orders, no words. The whole room sank into stillness. In the dark, they imagined the small flame again, the dancing light, the smoke curling around the bowl, the warmth brushing their fingers. They felt their hearts slow, beating gently, evenly. Someone began to cry without knowing why. Perhaps because the warmth in their minds felt so real it hurt. They were no longer filthy prisoners in a cell. They were people gathered around a hearth at home in winter, listening to the wood crackle. The smell of smoke, the sound of wind, the sense of heat, all blended together like the last song of humanity before fading into oblivion. Someone whispered, "If there's anyone out there, maybe they're sitting by a fire too." "If there's anyone out there," another replied. "They probably don't even remember what smoke smells like." The words melted into the dark, but no one thought them meaningless. Because in that moment, all of them, those tattered souls, had created a ritual without creed or language. A memorial for fire, for food, for warmth. Things once so ordinary they were forgotten, now sacred enough to draw tears. When the last hint of warmth disappeared, they still sat motionless. No one left. Because in each of their minds, the flame still burned, faint but alive. And in that moment, the silence of the dungeon was no longer terrifying. It became a heavy veil, where people and their memories merged, leaving behind a fragile warmth, a miracle born from ashes, and a night that never stopped devouring everything. In the dark corner of the dungeon, where torchlight never reached, 4 or 5 people still gathered quietly each night. They didn't speak loudly, didn't look at each other for long, only exchanged quick glances, the kind of language born from those who'd lived too long in fear. One of them, a woman thin as a shadow, hid a few crumbs of dry bread beneath her tattered hem, something she'd traded for the last scrap of cloth she still had. The crumbs were no bigger than beans, yet she held them in trembling hands as if they were gold. She looked around, then whispered, "Come." One by one, they crept closer and sat on the cold floor. No one spoke. They sat in a circle, heads bowed. The woman pulled out the cloth, unfolding it slowly, revealing 4 crumbs barely the size of fingertips. Their eyes glimmered, not from hunger, but from something deeper, like the memory of what it meant to share. She said softly, "It's been 10 days since the fire went out. I've kept these until now, to share." No one replied, but an old man nodded. He closed his eyes and muttered words too faint to catch, like a prayer. A younger man chuckled lightly. "A bread-sharing ritual, like in the old days." "No," she answered, "like those still alive." The air froze at her words. Then she broke the first crumb into 5 pieces by hand, not evenly, yet no one complained. Each piece was placed into an open palm, received in silence. No one ate right away. They held the crumbs in their hands, looked at them, and whispered, "For the dead." The smallest piece was left in the center of the circle, on the old cloth, like an offering. The old man leaned forward, scooped up a pinch of ash from the floor, and sprinkled it over. "Something for them to take with them," he said, his voice no louder than breath. Another, so thin his ribs showed, spoke up. "If they were still here, they wouldn't want to eat either." The old man smiled sadly. Then we'll eat for them. They raised their crumbs together. No one slurped, no one rushed. They chewed slowly, letting the dry, rough taste dissolve, stretching each second of life a little longer. Someone closed his eyes, tears spilling down. "Sweet," he murmured. "I'd forgotten what flour tasted like." Another smiled faintly. "That's the taste of being alive. Don't forget it." The quiet sound of chewing filled the air, soft and steady, almost like a hymn. No one spoke again, but their eyes met no suspicion, no anger. In that moment, these hollow, starved, fevered souls managed to do what the outside world had long forgotten. They shared. When they finished, the woman folded the cloth, pressed it to her chest. "Next time," she said, "if there is one, we'll share again." The young man gave a weak smile. "If there is." His voice trailed off, fading into the air. The old storyteller lifted his gaze, looking at the circle before him. Their faces were gaunt and filthy, yet strangely serene. He whispered, "Once, I saw people sit around a feast, laughing, raising their glasses. Tonight, I see the starving sit around crumbs in silence. But I believe, if any god were watching, he'd know the difference." His words made them lift their heads, then bow again. None dared believe in God here, yet all felt something flicker inside them, a remnant of humanity, of memory, of buried faith. After a long silence, the young man spoke again. "We should say something, to remember this." "No need," the old man said. "Just remember this silence." They sat a while longer, then quietly drifted apart, returning to their corners of the cell. The woman kept the cloth open, unwrapped, as if hoping the scent of bread might linger a little longer. The old man, before closing his eyes, reached out and traced words onto the stone floor with his finger. "We shared a piece of bread, and in that moment we were human." No one read it. No one saw it. The torch outside had long gone out. But in that damp, freezing dungeon, where humanity had been scraped to the bone, there still existed one small ritual, a memorial of kindness in the dark, needing no words, no miracles, only trembling hands passing to each other something smaller than hope. That morning, after a night of endless rain, the dungeon floor was flooded, damp, rotting, and heavy with the stench of mould, rust, and human decay. No one slept. They only waited for the sound of the door, for something they still called a meal. When the iron hinges screeched open, everyone lifted their heads, their eyes hollow, yet still flickering with that last ember of instinct. 2 guards appeared, armor splattered with mud, laughing as if they'd stepped into a theatre. One carried a large wooden bucket, dark, dripping thick liquid onto the stones. "Breakfast for you!" he shouted, then tipped it over. The sludge poured out, spreading across the floor, splashing the legs of the nearest prisoners. The smell hit instantly, the reek of rotting meat, dead fish, and something sharp and acrid like burnt oil. A few retched, but the rest crawled forward, fast as starving animals. They didn't wait, didn't ask, just plunged their hands into the filth, digging through it. The sounds of chewing rose, mixed with ragged breaths, and the crunch of cartilage breaking between teeth. One man looked up, mouth smeared brown, eyes wide, trembling as he laughed. "Meat, real meat," he said, like he'd found something holy. But then he froze. In his hand was a blackened bone wrapped in rotting skin, crawling with white maggots. He stared, then burst into laughter, wild, hysterical, as if to stop laughing meant to die. The others kept eating, clawing, fighting grunts, growls and cries blending into a savage chorus. A woman snatched a lump that looked like a rotten potato and shoved it into her mouth without chewing. Her eyes flared, terrified someone might steal it. "Don't touch it!" she screamed, scratching the face of the man beside her. Blood sprayed, but no one stopped. One guard laughed hard, slamming his stick against the bars. "Eat! Eat it all, you vermin!" he yelled, turning to his companion. "It's a wonder how easy humans turn into this." They left, laughing, the door clanging shut behind them, a sound so final it made a few prisoners pause, gasping. The stench lingered, wrapping around them like a thick fog. One man slumped down, staring at his hand, where the meat had melted into sludge. "This is garbage," he whispered. "Stuff not even dogs would touch." The old storyteller sat nearby, watching, not with judgment, not with pity. "We're not dogs," he said softly. "We're the hungry. Hunger doesn't choose." A younger man, still crouched in the mess, nodded faintly. "When you're starving, man and beast aren't so different." His words silenced everyone. Outside, the rain drummed on the iron roof, steady as a heartbeat counting down to death. The old man closed his eyes, speaking slowly. "What they threw to us was meant to humiliate, but I ate because I fear dying. Maybe they know that." Another let out a broken laugh, bitter and cracked. "If they brought more of that tomorrow, I'd still crawl for it." "Why?" "Because when you're starving, you don't get to choose dignity," no one argued. Those who had eaten now lay still, clutching what was left. One man, skin stretched over bone, licked his fingers and raised them to his nose. "Still smells like meat," he murmured, almost lovingly. The stench of rot clung to everything: walls, cracks, breaths. Another man sat silent, scratching at the floor, voice raw and low. "If they brought us trash, I'd eat that too. As long as there's something to put in my mouth, I still exist." The old storyteller opened his eyes, glancing around. "I've seen men cry from hunger," he said. "And now I've seen men laugh while eating garbage. Maybe there's no difference anymore." No one replied. They only sat, heads bowed, still chewing the scraps. The wet, sloshing sound filled the dungeon, mingling with the rain, a requiem for the living, devoured by emptiness, trapped in a world where the line between survival and destruction no longer exists. The wet, squelching sounds of chewing blended with the sobs, echoing through the dark cell like a distorted symphony of starving souls. No one knew what they were eating anymore, only that the wet, rotten taste in their mouths at least made them feel alive. One man lowered his head, chewing and sobbing at the same time, tears mixing with the dirty water dripping from his chin. "So salty," he said, voice trembling, unsure if it was from taste or from crying. The man beside him looked up, lips quivering, eyes bloodshot. "It's salty because of your tears." The words made a few others laugh, short, hoarse laughs, like wind brushing over a dying flame. In the thick air heavy with the stench of spoiled meat and burnt oil, those sounds hit the walls and bounced back, echoing like the voice of hell itself. A young woman, her hair tangled and matted, held a soggy piece of bread in her shaking hands. She couldn't bite it, only held it in her mouth. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Mother, I'm eating. I'm really eating." She didn't know who she was speaking to, but everyone heard her and fell silent. An old man in the corner wiped his eyes with a trembling hand, his voice rough and broken. "You're lucky to still have a mother to call." Another prisoner, nothing but skin and bones, let out a cracked laugh. "And I can't even remember a face anymore. Only the smell of porridge." His laugh died in his throat, turning into a dry cough that scraped the air like stone grinding against stone. No one spoke. They all knew they were thinking the same thing, what their last real meal had been, who sat beside them, and whether they could still remember the sound of someone saying, "Eat, my dear." The old storyteller sat against the wall, clutching a stub of charcoal, too weak to write. He only looked around with cloudy eyes and murmured, "We're eating our own tears now." No one answered, because they all understood. The chewing continued slow, quiet, punctuated by the heavy sound of breathing, like the faint heartbeat of the dungeon itself. Outside, wind howled through the corridor, whistling past the cracks, carrying a sound that almost resembled someone crying far away. A young man lifted his head, his voice trembling. "Do you hear that? Sounds like a child crying." He stopped, listening hard, eyes wide. Then he laughed, slapped his own face, and muttered, "No, it's just the wind." His smile twisted, his gaze drifting somewhere between sanity and madness. The young woman still sat motionless, gripping the mouldy bread, whispering, "If anyone could see us now, they'd call us insane." The old man replied softly, his voice like dying embers, "Without madness, we wouldn't survive." His words made the whole cell fall still. Water dripped from the ceiling, each drop landing in a filthy puddle, falling in rhythm with the sounds of swallowing, crying, and breathing. Each noise seemed to carry weight, pressing down on their chests, squeezing the life out of them little by little. Then suddenly, one man stood up and screamed, "I can't take it anymore." He slammed his hand against the wall, blood splattering, dripping onto the face of the man beside him. "What are we, humans or filth?" No one answered. He screamed again, then collapsed, sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. The old storyteller looked at him and sighed. "Why ask? The answer's already inside our bellies." Every pair of eyes turned toward him, but he said no more. He lifted the piece of charcoal, tracing invisible lines in the air, as if still writing on the unseen wall between life and despair. After a long silence, someone laughed quietly, barely more than a whisper. "I can hear the rain outside. Maybe the rain's hungry too." No one understood, but a few nodded, as if it was the most reasonable thing ever said. The crying continued, softer now. Impossible to tell whose voice it was anymore. One man sat hugging his knees, tears streaming down his dirty legs, mixing with mud and leaving streaks like scars. "I once swore I'd never cry again," he murmured, "but crying's the only thing I can still do." Another man rasped in reply, "Then cry. If we stop, we'll turn to stone." In the dim torchlight, their faces, once different, now looked hauntingly alike, lit by the faint reflection of souls trapped in the same cage. The sounds of chewing, crying, and laughter blended into one, their edges gone, their meaning lost. Outside, the sky drowned in grey rain, unseen. Inside, they bowed their heads, eating, weeping, surviving in that thin space where life and humiliation melted into one single instinct. A man whispered, his voice distant as if echoing from another world. "If anyone out there remembers us, don't think of us as mad. Just remember we were only hungry." No one answered. They just sat there, chewing, crying, and in those sounds between the wind and their own heartbeats, no one knew if they were still alive or had already been swallowed whole by the hunger that turned them into hollow shadows, slowly dissolving into the thick darkness, until every last sound became nothing but the final sob of humanity, forgotten beneath the ruins of its own existence. The storyteller admitted, hunger had turned them all into ghosts. He sat there, among the twisted bodies, eyes sunken, lips cracked, breath spilling out in white mist. The walls were damp, the floor cold, the air thick with the stench of rotten meat and human decay. He trembled as he looked around. Those who once laughed, spoke, prayed, were now only figures drifting in the dark. No one looked at anyone anymore. Their eyes were cloudy, like the hollow sockets of skulls, shining with a strange light, not the light of life, but of hunger so deep it began to glow from within. He muttered, his voice hoarse, "We're no longer people, we're walking hunger." The words came out weakly, like a confession. No one answered. They heard, but didn't understand or pretended not to. Long starvation had blurred the line between soul and body, leaving only reflexes. To seek, to eat, to swallow, and to wait. The woman who once shared crumbs now lay motionless in a corner, still clutching an empty piece of cloth. Her eyes were half open, staring into nothing, and that look made him shiver, because it held no fear, no hope, only pure emptiness. A young man, who once dreamed of a summer feast, sat against the wall, his mouth moving as if chewing, but nothing in his hands. He chewed slowly, endlessly, as though his body had forgotten how to stop. Each dry chop-chep sound echoed like wind whistling through bones. He looked at the man, then turned away. He couldn't bear to look longer, because in each of them he now saw himself. He too had fought, bitten, drunk the foul water, begged for a grain of rice, licked the walls to trick his stomach. Now, seeing them, he realized they were no longer men, just forgotten spirits, still walking, still breathing, but with nothing left behind their eyes. "We," he whispered, "are fading." A man nearby lifted his head, eyes blank. "Fading? There's nothing left to fade." Then he laughed, a cracked grin splitting his face like a fracture in stone. The storyteller said nothing. In his mind, another voice echoed his own, from long ago, "To live is to protect your soul." Now, that sounded like a joke. Because here, the soul was rarer than food. He could see it, the change in each of them. Their faces no longer showed expression. They moved slowly, quietly, like shadows without owners, drifting past one another without touch. The drag of their feet blended with the wind's hum into a mournful, haunting tune. One man lay near the iron door, where a little light filtered through. The beam fell across his face but didn't warm him. It only revealed sharp bones and dry scars. He raised a trembling hand toward the light, like a child reaching for a mirage. "It goes right through me," he said, his voice rough. "The light doesn't even make my skin warm anymore." Hearing that, the storyteller closed his eyes. Yes, the light was no longer light. It passed through them as if they were no longer solid. Another whispered, "I saw someone walk through the wall last night. He didn't touch anyone." No one answered, no one called him mad. Here, anything could be true. When the body weakens enough to barely exist, one starts believing they can leave it at any moment. An old man, half blind, murmured, "We have no weight left. A breeze could carry us away." The words chilled him to the bone. He lifted his hand. It was grey, trembling, dry like the bark of a dead tree. He wondered if he might already be dead, only thinking he was alive. Maybe they were all just souls trapped, waiting to fade. He looked around. Those who once raged, fought, dreamed, laughed, were now just still figures, breathing faintly, eyes drifting like smoke. Hunger was no longer pain in the stomach. It had seeped into their marrow, their minds draining colour from voices, memories, from the very instinct of being human. He lifted his gaze to the ceiling and whispered, "We don't fear death anymore. We only fear continuing like this." Someone murmured in reply, voice like dry leaves. Death would at least be rest. And then silence took over again. In that silence, he could still hear something faint. The weak breathing, the rattle of chains, the tired rhythm of hearts, all blending into one sad symphony of souls not yet allowed to vanish. He took a deep breath. It felt like inhaling nothing, no air, no smell, only emptiness. He smiled faintly, crookedly, voice thin as wind. "We've starved to death, yet we still breathe. That means we've gone beyond death." And in that moment, he understood they were no longer people, no longer prisoners, but shadows of their former lives, lost inside the dungeon, where darkness had devoured both flesh and spirit, leaving behind only bare existence, formless, voiceless, a lingering stain of life stretched too far, one even God himself might no longer wish to see. Someone whispered, "If I ever get out, I'll eat until I'm full, and then I can die happy." The words broke through the thick silence like a dying flame flickering in the dark. The one who spoke was the youngest of them all, his eyes sunken but still holding a strange light, the kind that belongs to someone who hasn't yet surrendered. He sat with his back against the wall, one hand gripping a rusted iron bar, his gaze distant, fixed on something no one else could see. His voice trembled, but it wasn't weak. It rang out, mixing with the cold air, echoing against the stone walls like a secret vow. The others turned to look at him, but no one spoke. Someone let out a dry laugh, a sound that could have been scorn or pity. "Get out?" a hoarse old voice rasped. "And where would you go? It's colder out there than it is here, and there's nothing to eat." The young man looked up, his eyes hardening. "I know," he said slowly, "but at least I'd choose my last meal, not the garbage they throw at us like we're dogs." The cell went quiet. His voice wasn't loud, but it touched something deep that everyone had been trying to hide. A woman closed her eyes, exhaled long and slow. "Eat until full. That sounds beautiful. I've forgotten what that feels like." He turned to her, smiled faintly. "I haven't. I remember every smell, every sound. The knife hitting the cutting board, water boiling, the scent of fried onions, the smoke from the stove." His voice trailed off, shaking like someone in fever. "I remember it until it drives me mad." Another man, thin and hollow, muttered, "And what good is remembering? Here, even imagination has no flavour." But the young man didn't hear. His eyes fixed on nothing, and in that nothing he saw a long table, warm bread, roasted meat, red wine spilling down his throat. He smiled a real smile, rare among the living dead. "If I ever get out, I'll eat until my stomach bursts." The old storyteller watched him, eyes filled with quiet sorrow. He asked softly, "And then what?" "Then?" The young man shrugged. "Then I can die. But I'll die with a full belly." His voice was steady, as if speaking of a bright dream rather than a hopeless fantasy. The old man chuckled weakly. "How strange. The young no longer dream of freedom, but of a meal. Because I've learned freedom without food is still hell," the boy answered, eyes burning. No one spoke. They all heard it, but none argued. He was right. Hunger had twisted every meaning. Faith, honor, morality, they'd all been chewed away until only the instinct to survive remained. And now, even survival no longer mattered as much as the thought of being full, just once. The old woman looked at him, her voice barely more than a sigh. "You think you'll escape?" He looked at her and smiled. "I don't know. But I'll try. And if I can't, I'll still imagine that I did." He bent down, picked up a small pebble, placed it on his knee. "Let's say this is a piece of bread," he whispered. "I'll eat it slowly, close my eyes, and pretend it's soft, warm, tastes of butter." He lifted the pebble to his mouth and bit down. His teeth hit stone with a sharp crack, but he didn't flinch. He chewed, slowly, eyes shut. The others watched him, and strangely, none of them laughed. Another picked up a pebble, copied him, then another, and another. In the dark, the sound of teeth grinding against stone filled the air. Not madness, but desperation, learning how to survive through imagination. The old storyteller murmured, "Maybe that's the only freedom left, to imagine you're full." The young man opened his eyes, swallowed hard, still smiling faintly. "Hunger won't kill me," he said. "Only despair can do that." Someone chuckled, voice rasping. "Then be grateful, there's plenty of despair here, enough for everyone." They all laughed softly, without knowing why. The laughter mixed with the wind, thin, fragile, but real. For that moment, they weren't ghosts anymore, but people small, broken, yet still capable of dreaming about something so simple it hurt: to eat until full. The young man looked up toward the iron grate where a faint line of daylight filtered in, cutting across his face. "Maybe the outside is just another hell," he whispered. "But at least out there, I could die with my mouth full." No one said another word. The wind slipped through the cracks, carrying with it the scent of wet earth, the smell of the world beyond foreign, but enough to make everyone go still. For a fleeting second, they all lifted their heads, as if they could smell it too. And in that rare moment, hunger, cold, and fear fell away, replaced by something both beautiful and cruel, the smallest, most human longing to eat, to know that life, no matter how fragile, still had a taste worth swallowing one last time. The story closes with the image of a trembling bowl of thin porridge in his hands, a symbol of life barely holding on. The old storyteller sat leaning against the wall, eyes wide open, staring into the cracked wooden bowl tilting in his palms. Inside, only a little cloudy, cold water remained, reflecting his gaunt face like a ghost. He slowly lifted the bowl, hands shaking slightly, as if afraid to spill the most precious thing left in the world. Around him the other prisoners lay still, some with heads slumped, others staring blankly into nothing. Silence, not of peace, but of emptiness. Nothing left to say, nothing left to breathe, nothing left to live for. The wind howled through the cracks of the cell door, sounding like someone groaning. Each gust made the torch outside flicker, casting light through the iron bars, falling across faces hollow, twisted, frozen like forgotten statues. He raised the bowl to his lips and took a sip. Cold. Tasteless. But he closed his eyes and imagined it was warm porridge, with onions, with salt, with the smoky scent of a kitchen fire. In that moment, his lips trembled, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. No one could tell if it was a smile or a sob. A drop of porridge slid from his mouth, fell onto his shirt, leaving a pale stain that hardened in the cold. He whispered, "It's still warm." But his voice was so faint no one heard. Outside, dawn had not yet broken. The ground was covered in frost. In the distance, thin trails of smoke rose from village chimneys like illusions. And here, In the pit of the earth where no sunlight reached, there was only the bowl of thin porridge, the last proof that life hadn't yet gone out, lingering like a fragile breath on the wooden rim. The old storyteller tilted his head, looking into the empty bottom of the bowl, and for the first time in many days, he realized he was smiling not because he was full, but because he could still feel alive, if only for one more breath. If you're still listening now, take a deep breath. The story of the last bowl of porridge isn't just a tale from the dark. It's a mirror of the instinct to survive that lives inside us all. Because in the frozen heart of the medieval winter, where snow and despair become one, it is the will to live even as small as the last warmth in a bowl of porridge that keeps us from disappearing. Thank you for staying with me through this long night, where the wind, hunger, and a thin bowl of porridge whisper the last fragments of what it means to be human amid a merciless winter. If you're still here, it means your heart is still beating with this story. Don't forget to subscribe and join me in the nights to come, where the coldest mysteries still wait to be uncovered. Now, close your eyes, let the warmth of sleep hold you. Good night, and remember the winter isn't over yet.